28 years, I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I had what I thought was the best life ever. We all did. We even had a song about it.
I'm where I want to be. This is the best life ever.
And it's kind of a bop, to be honest. Truthfully, I enjoyed my time as a Jehovah's Witness, with some notable exceptions that we'll get to later in the video. My life was great because my family was great. I come from what witnesses call a rich spiritual heritage. I had a long line of family members with a history in the religion. My great-grandfather's cousin was one of the anointed, one of only 144,000 people throughout all of human history who would get to go to heaven. And he was so respected and loved in our witness community that the publications even wrote an article about his life story. My grandfather helped build tons of kingdom halls in the tri-state area, and my father followed in his footsteps. My father had me. I was in a prolific and loving family that was in a religion that I thought had the truth. That was the truth. That's what we called it. The religion was the truth. When you're in the religion, you're in the truth. And when you're out of the religion, you're out of the truth. And now, I'm on YouTube making this video criticizing my religion as somebody who is out of the truth. And because Jehovah's Witnesses shun former members, I didn't only leave the religion, I left everything my family built and my family itself. So what's the deal with that? I've talked a lot in bits and pieces over the last year about my journey, but the last time I did a video like this, I was still in the religion as an active member. And a lot of life has happened. Near-death experiences, hospitalizations, secret recordings, sex, drugs, rock and roll. So I figured it was time to talk about my entire journey from beginning to end. And I do mean end, because by the end of this video, I will be dead. It's good to set stakes at the very beginning of the video. That's just good storytelling. So you'll never believe it, but I scripted that intro, and now I am unscripted. I'm just going to be talking about my life. So if you were annoyed by my presentation, good. I am too, and I wish I knew how to do my job better. So yeah, if you're familiar with my channel, you've probably heard me talk about like some of this stuff before. So I might repeat myself a little bit, but I'll also have new information, juicy new twists in the story of my real life that actually happened and is happening currently. I meant what I said at the beginning of the video, though. I had a really happy upbringing in an incredibly loving family. I doubt that my family would be able to sit through that introduction, to be honest, but I hope that they watch the video. I'm kind of making it with the hopes that one of them might sit through it. So if you're that lucky family member, look under your seat. You want a free conversation with me on the phone, call me. My dad was the oldest of 7 kids, so I had lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, but in my house, it was just my mom, my dad, my sister, and myself. I have a younger sister, and we had a really, really pleasant childhood. My parents were awesome, wonderful parents, and I just had a good old time, you know. My mom was able to not work in our early childhood days, so she was able to stay at home with us. And she was really a wonderful teacher. My mom's a really remarkable woman, and I just have so much love and respect for her. She taught me and my sister how to read at a pretty young age. We did have a love for books and reading. My mom still tells stories about how before I could even walk, I was crawling to books. I just loved books and pictures and things like that. So me and my sister were able to read at a young age because of how she taught us. She's a great teacher. She's not the great teacher, for that is Jesus Christ our Lord, of course. But along those lines, I grew up listening to Jehovah's Witness stuff all the time. They produced tapes that were audio recordings, like audiobooks on tape of some of the publications, including the My Book of Bible Stories cassette, the Great Teacher Book cassette, and some audio dramas. And I remember listening to those in my Fisher-Price cassette player with all my little toys on the windowsill. And I would fall asleep at night listening to podcasts, which is what I do now. So not a lot has changed. My parents, of course, did this because this is what is considered good parenting when you're a witness. And of course, there's nothing wrong with letting your kids listen to stuff when they fall asleep. It is a little weird in hindsight now with my current perspective of the kind of thing I was listening to a lot of as a kid.
Before us will fall all of the enemies of Israel.
Amen.
Jamin, what do you think about the women?
What women?
The Moabite women, of course.
Like falling asleep listening to stories of God destroying the earth full of bad people, a few times actually, Jezebel getting murdered to death by dogs after being defenestrated. These were the kind of things filling my head at a young age, but I didn't see anything wrong with that, and probably it was mostly harmless. But when you are a Jehovah's Witness, it is every part of your life. We say being in the truth, like I said in the intro, right? When you're a witness, you are in the truth. And it's more than just the fact that the religion is true. Like, it's not just that witnesses have true doctrines. It's that it is the way. It is the truth. It is the light, like Jesus Christ our Lord.
This is the way.
This is the way.
Being in the truth doesn't even necessarily mean that everything you believe is correct, because the organization is imperfect, as they will be quick to remind you. They make mistakes. But being in the truth means that, like, you're in the best way of life. You're in that best life possible, the best life ever. And I was surrounded from a young age with a really incredible, loving family. I think the thing I love most about my family is how funny everyone is. And everyone is not just funny, but like quick-witted, sharp, and capable of devastating you to your core. Like, my family is full of kind of cynical people who have a really, not cynical worldview, like it's like sardonic take. I don't know. They're really funny people to be around. And part of that is because everybody loves to read. We would go on family vacations and we would just like get a cabin on a lake, stay there for a week, and everyone would just bring books and we would just lay around by the lake and swim. And when we weren't swimming, we were reading. And not just the Bible and Watchtower and Awake. We would read novels or whatever the, newest hit book was. And so I had a lot of respect for like how smart my family was and is. They're a group of really smart people. And especially we all had respect for my great-grandfather's cousin, who was, as I mentioned at the outset, an incredibly influential person, not just in our local area, but he had quite a reputation in the organization, and he had that life story written about him. And what's remarkable about him is he was a NASA scientist. He was literally a rocket scientist who developed, I think, like 30 patents in his career. He was a genius. But the life story that was written about him was about how his greatest discovery was not like jet propulsion stuff that he designed, but rather finding out that God's name is Jehovah and studying the Bible, learning the truth. So there was always this vibe in the family that is the greatest thing about all of us. The thing that makes our family special is not our personalities. It's not who we are. It's not us as individuals. It's the fact that we are Jehovah's Witnesses. It's that we are in the truth. That's not to say that the family doesn't appreciate how special they are, because I think that our family knows that, like, we have a really special, tight-knit family. I know every family thinks that they have a special family, but you know what I mean. There were some exceptions to this family, though. I had an aunt who was disfellowshipped for quite a long time, but I knew her from before she got disfellowshipped. So it was a thing I had to learn about when she got disfellowshipped, that we don't get to talk to my aunt so-and-so anymore. I'm not going to mention their names in the video because I don't think they'd want me Chris rocking them. I don't think they'd want their names in my mouth. So I had to learn what disfellowshipping was from a young age, because I had an aunt on both sides of my family who were disfellowshipped for a time, and I had an uncle who was also disfellowshipped and who I just knew nothing about, and we all knew that he existed somewhere far away, but we just didn't talk about him. We don't talk about Bruno, right? It was just like, he's the guy that nobody talks about because he's the guy that like intentionally left the religion. And so I don't think he'll come back later in the story. Actually, I know that he won't because I filmed the later sections. I won't spoil it. And I bring that up just because I feel like that's what it's like, even in the best scenario as a witness kid. Even if you're in a loving family and everybody gets along really great, there's still sort of an undercurrent of darkness to it. There is an undercurrent of like impending doom to everything because, of course, as a Jehovah's Witness, you believe that Armageddon is coming any time now. The Great Tribulation will soon come, and then Armageddon. And, you know, everything that's happening is just proof that it's coming, whether it's good or bad. So we get to have nice conversations, but it always goes back to this system is ending. This system is doomed, because that's what we call the world. We call it this system, because in our translation of the Bible, it's translated Satan's system of things. A lot of Bible translations call it the age, like the end of the age, or the end of time even, or the end of the world. But the New World Translation calls it the end of the system of things. And that's how it was with the family dynamic. It was everything is great, and we have such a wonderful family, but there's this undercurrent of, we don't talk about your dad's brother, because he's the bad one, and he might come to a funeral every now and then, but he sits in the back, and we don't talk to him, and everyone's real weird about it. I actually, now that I'm talking about this, I remember when it clicked in my brain, it was somebody who is a friend of our family, and I knew him as being a really funny guy. He always made me laugh, and so I went up to try and talk to him at a convention, and he wouldn't say hi to me. I saw him sitting with a nice young lady. It was his age. I made it sound weird. He was with probably his girlfriend or something. And I said hi, and I'm like a little kid, right? I'm probably like 5 years old, and he doesn't respond. And I remember being upset, like, wow, why is my friend, who's always so funny and nice, not talking to me? And I had to ask my mom and my dad. I said, I tried to say hi to Butch, which was his name, which I don't know. It's just funny. It's just funny in hindsight that anybody's named Butch, to be honest. So, and they had to explain to me, well, he was disfellowshipped. He is being disciplined. And I remember them describing it kind of like I would be disciplined, being in timeout. And so that's how I thought of it. But I definitely remember one day I was able to talk to this person, and the next day I was not. These are just the fun little nuances that you have when you're a kid. But, my parents really were remarkable for Jehovah's Witness parents in that they cared so much about making sure that me and my sister felt loved and felt normal. They seemed to really get that it sucks being a witness in school because you're not allowed to celebrate holidays. I would sit out in the hallway sometimes during a holiday, or I would go to the computer and play some computer game when everyone was celebrating a birthday or having a Christmas celebration, or when the class was reading Harry Potter, I would go and I would sit in the hallway. But my parents always did a good job of making us feel included. Even though we didn't get to celebrate birthdays, we would just get gifts throughout the year. They would just surprise us with gifts, and it was always wonderful. And we would ask, what's the occasion? And they'd say, because we love you. It was always reinforced too that this is because we're Jehovah's Witnesses, and we are not like worldly people who just give presents on holidays because they have to, out of obligation. We give presents because we love you. People on Christmas don't love their families, by the way. It's obligation or it's out of love. You can't be two things, ever. But the other thing that defined my childhood, in addition to being a witness, was the fact that I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at a pretty young age. I started to get really sick around the time I was probably 6 years old. I constantly had like flu-like symptoms and would be in urgent care or the emergency room, and I was just there all the time. And it got to the point where I was just throwing up. I couldn't keep down any kind of food. I couldn't even keep down water. So much of my childhood was spent like in hospitals, in waiting rooms, lots and lots of waiting rooms, lots of tests, lots of scans. And eventually they figured out that I have Crohn's disease. And I still have Crohn's disease to this day. But that was notable as a kid because once I was diagnosed with that, I had a lot of trouble sleeping at night. I had a lot of trouble sleeping throughout my life due to anxiety. And it still happens sometimes, but it happened when I was a little kid because I would think about death an awful lot, as you do as a Jehovah's Witness. Kind of something interesting is you're taught, like, we're not like people in the world. We don't fear death because we know that there's going to be a resurrection. So as long as you're good, you'll be resurrected. As long as you're good. And so if you're bad, you won't be resurrected. And I am a very sensitive young lad. My parents loved saying this to me when I was exiting the religion too. That's one of the big reasons why they said I left, because I was too sensitive. And we'll talk about some of the things I was too sensitive about later. But they're right, I really was too sensitive. I would internalize everything, and I still do now. And I would think a lot about that. I would think a lot about whether or not I was worthy of being resurrected. Every time my dad raised his voice, it wasn't just that I was disappointing him, which is the worst. You hate to disappoint your parents. But it was that I was disappointing Jehovah in some way.
Are you okay?
What if Jehovah doesn't want to be my friend anymore?
And so I grew up having trouble sleeping, worried about dying, not just because of the maybe I won't be resurrected thing, but also because of the blood thing. Jehovah's Witnesses don't accept blood transfusions for a variety of scriptures where it's commanded not to eat blood. And they say, well, if God commanded you not to drink alcohol, but you injected it into your veins, you wouldn't be following the orders, would you? You would still be consuming alcohol, so don't consume blood into your body. Surely the Bible writers had this in mind, intravenous transfusions of blood. And that includes kids. Now, it was never really an issue that was presented to me as, like, you're losing a lot of blood and you might need a blood transfusion. And as far as I know, my parents were never pressured into having me get one. Like, they didn't get pressure from doctors that I need to have a blood transfusion or I'll die. But I didn't need that. I didn't need the actual event. The fear of it happening was more than enough for me. And so I would think about that because the magazines, and there's one particularly infamous Awake or Watchtower that shows the examples of kids who died because they defended their faith in God wanting them to die instead of live because he doesn't like this particular colored liquid going in your body. It's the bad color. He's like one of those people from the village. That was a kind of scary thing because there would be like stories in these magazines of kids who had to make a firm stand for their faith, and maybe they went to court and the judge is trying to convince the child, but this little kid stands up and is like, the little kid sounds like Droopy, dog.
Sorry, Judge, I have something to say about blood.
So I had a feeding tube inserted from a young age. I had basically a gastric tube inserted above my belly button, and got feeding tube formula at night, and I still remember very vividly the sound that thing made, and I remember the feeling of that machine and stuff. So, a lot of my upbringing is kind of like weird memories of medical trauma. I don't think there's any need to unpack that in any capacity other than a YouTube video. Moving on. But what I was very fortunate about is that our congregation was incredibly supportive of my family. Now, my dad was an elder and was very well liked and was on the regional building committee. Now it's the Legional Dilding Committee. It's the LDC. I forget what it stands for. Something design and construction. Stay tuned for Legional Dilding Committee t-shirts. So the congregation was wonderful. They would bring meals to my parents. They would visit me in the hospital. And I just felt really loved and supported by the congregation. I do remember feeling really, really stressed out when I finally had to go back to the Kingdom Hall after being away for like several months because of being sick. And I remember feeling really nervous about going back and kind of not wanting to go back. But that was more just the guilt. I felt so guilty that I'd been away, even though I had kind of a valid reason for being away because I was like a sick, dying child. Like and subscribe, by the way. If you don't, you're rejecting the needs of that dying child. But for the most part, I have pretty good memories of growing up as a witness. My sickness has nothing to do with that. So I had a wonderful congregation that I was a part of, and great little friends, and I just had no real problems, except for one. Well, I had two, because I had Crohn's disease and was sick all the time. And two, I had a teacher that did not like Jehovah's Witnesses. In 4th grade, I had Mrs. Conroy. I'll say her name because she's probably dead, and if she's not, forward this to her. Mrs. Conroy was an old dinosaur bird of a lady. You know, like in Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs that have like the hard, like bone exposed skull, like the ramming head dinosaurs and the little beak mouth. She looked like that. She looked like one of those dinosaurs with a wig and wire rim glasses and freckles, and I guess she just looked like a generic old lady. I don't know why the dinosaur thing popped into my head. She was, I think, just irritated with me, quite frankly, because I was a very high-maintenance student in her mind. I was out all the time for being sick, so I was always behind on homework, and I'm pretty sure that the only reason why I passed the 4th grade was because of events that will come to light in several minutes. Stay tuned. So I'm out sick all the time, and the class is reading Harry Potter together, but not me. I have to have a special program where I sit outside, but they're like basing the class curriculum around vocabulary words and stuff that they learn in Harry Potter. And so she has to like make a separate lesson plan for me. So probably she's just kind of annoyed with Jehovah's Witnesses in general, right? But I wasn't doing so great in the class. There's one day where I was there late after school, and my mom was there to pick me up, and my teacher caught us in the hallway, when my sister was with me too, and she's like, hey, let me talk to you for a second. We go up to her room, and she starts just chewing out my mom, and she starts yelling at her, and she's backed her into a corner. My mom is crying, and Mrs. Conroy is saying, the reason why he's sick is because of your controlling religion. I was horrified. I loved my controlling religion. I did not feel that way then, and I don't feel that way now. Mrs. Conroy, if you're watching, you miserly old crone. Sorry, Laura Crone, if you're watching. I can't help that that's your last name. And this was quite traumatic, as you might imagine. So me and my sister are crying, watching this scene unfold. And my mom walks right down to the principal's office and says, hey, one of the teachers just yelled at me about how my kid is sick because of my faith in Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian. And I'm sure that's not what they said, but the school is like, oh shit. This kind of thing is in the news, religious discrimination in schools, and oh my god, one of our teachers just yelled at a student's parent about their religion because Mrs. Conroy was Catholic, as if things couldn't get any worse. So my dad came from work to talk to the principal as well. My whole family's in there, and I'm telling you this story for a reason. And it's laid out to my parents. Basically, say the word, Mrs. Conroy is fired, because you really can't yell at the kids for their religious beliefs in schools. It is frowned upon to this day. But my parents said, no, we just want her to drop her hateful attitude and to apologize. And that was pretty remarkable. It gave a good witness to the principal and even to wicked old Mrs. Conroy, that old git. This stood out to me in my mind throughout my entire life. I was even interviewed about it on an assembly as a young lad. They put me up on stage in front of 800 witnesses or so, and I told my little story about overcoming religious oppression in schools. White Christian children are being oppressed these days, and that's the message of this video. Very importantly, this played into the entire witness narrative. Basically, we have the truth, and because we have the truth, we are going to be persecuted. We're going to be faced with challenges because we are Jehovah's Witnesses. And I faced one of those challenges at a young, impressionable age. It always stood with me. I still remember it very vividly. I learned from a young age that people like Mrs. Conroy, that leathery Cretaceous-era bitch, people like them existed, and they would persecute me just for being a Jehovah's Witness. It confirmed the entire narrative to me. And because I was able to be interviewed about it on the assembly, it just reinforced, we have the truth, and everything that Watchtower says is going to happen and is happening to Jehovah's servants, it is happening, and look, it's right there in my own life. The real cause of the Crohn's disease, probably genetics, not religion. Even then, though, as a kid, I have to admit, I had some issues with the religion. One thing about me was I was always very creative, and I liked to draw, I liked to write, and I loved to read. Reading is not creative, so I don't know why I included that with the bunch, but I liked to draw my own comics and write little poems and short stories and draw characters and stuff, and so I was always very imaginative, and because of that, I was very inquisitive. And if that seems like a brag, by the way, all of my skills has atrophied, and I'm now a, D-tier YouTuber, so not a brag. But because of that, I was always very inquisitive, always asking questions, and I have to say that I think my parents were always very good at answering my questions. It always did seem like there was an answer to all the questions I had. But one thing I did have an issue with that I wasn't quite able to overcome, I remember being real young and studying the Revelation Climax book, a book that was very shocking to children for several reasons, including the title. But the Revelation book is the exact kind of crazy secret decoder ring stuff that you love as a kid, because it's all about how the Bible says this, and it secretly means this, and there are beasts and monsters involved, and some hot lady riding a tiger horse head. Sign me up, sailor. So I would notice, because I thought the Bible was really cool and interesting, even though I had trouble reading it because the New World Translation, especially the old version of it, was very clunky in its wording. They would describe these really crazy prophecies, usually involving modern day nations. There's this picture of Adam and Jesus on a scale because of this grand cosmic mystery, and it did always seem like when I would try and be a good little JW and look up the scriptures, I just didn't see any of what they were saying in the Bible. I couldn't see the connection of how are they getting from the Bible to the strategy guide that explains all of the secret hidden stuff in the Bible. I've come to just call this getting a lot from a little. We're getting a lot of extrapolation from not a lot of information, and we're not always connecting the dots clearly. And that was something that bothered me a little bit, and it struck me when I was a preteen, when I was really trying to apply myself and be a better witness. Whenever I tried to read the scriptural evidence, I remember having a real realization when I realized that all of it goes back to the Garden of Eden account, and just kind of realizing boy, we're really getting a lot from this account that doesn't say a lot. I noticed, for instance, that Adam and Eve aren't described as being perfect in that account, and yet the fact that they were perfect and fell from perfection is a fundamental Watchtower teaching. So that was something that I noticed, but it was not something that I would consider a doubt. That wasn't something that made me think, uh-oh, maybe my religion isn't true. I have come to call these, and I apologize because I know I've said this a couple times, I've come to call these cracks in the windshield. Something kicks up from the back of a truck and dings your windshield, and there's just a tiny little crack on the passenger side. You see it and it jolts you for a second, but soon it just kind of drifts into your periphery and you don't think about it. And then every once in a while you'll check back and you'll see that crack now goes halfway across your windshield without you even realizing it. And that's what I would describe doubts as it wasn't so much that I was consciously setting them aside. It was something I would notice and go, probably shouldn't think about that. And I didn't even have the thing, by the way, Echo is just loving me right now, so I'm leaning down a lot. Sorry if I cut off my face with the video. So it's kind of hard to describe how this happens, because in my opinion, I never felt like I was constantly burdened by doubts until a specific moment, which we'll get to. Stay tuned for the big reveal. And I'm dying at the end, remember? Sure would be a shame if I forgot about that after this segment. What it felt like was more a jolt, something I noticed, but that I ultimately didn't think about. It faded away. And it wasn't until something specific would come up that I would kind of look over and realize oh, I need to get that fixed. Eventually, winter's coming and that ice is going to freeze and melt in there and expand and your windshield's going to shatter. And that's what happens to your faith, but you kind of don't realize it's happening until it's kind of far along. So that's what it was like. And I had a few of these cracks in my windshield over the years that were happening, little doubts that were accumulating that I didn't even necessarily know were there. The second big crack in the windshield for me was in something that I clocked as a disagreement And a head scratcher in the moment was, I guess what I'm going to call like a presumption of importance. Watchtower released this 2-part documentary that was released at 2 separate conventions that was a history of Jehovah's Witnesses. And that was really exciting because my parents always talk about the Proclaimers book. This was the history of our organization. But that book was long and dense and difficult for a youngster to read, even one who crawled to books. I'll just watch the movie version. So engaging with these videos was the first time I had even really thought about the organizational history. It was always something that would maybe be vaguely referenced in a Watchtower. But I watched this being very excited because I love history. And it's in this documentary that it lays out the prophetic reason why we believe that we're the true religion. It occurs to me in this moment, I never thought about why we think we're the true religion. I guess I just thought like, we're the true religion because we have the truth and we're right. Like, we're the one correct religion. But there was more than that. It was that Jehovah chose this religion for a specific reason, and this was actually foretold in the Bible. So I'm learning about this for the first time, and it essentially involves some complicated math starting in the book of Daniel, and that gets you to 1914, and some more math that's even more confusing. It gets you to 1919. And 1919 is when Jesus invisibly appointed Jehovah's organization, and we know this because this is when Rutherford and other Jehovah's Witnesses were let out of prison, and this represents coming out of Babylon the Great, which represents the world empire of false religion. I remember watching that and thinking, that seems like a lot of assumptions. Did I say it in that like a real flamboyant way? No, I did not, but I did say it in my head a little bit. I sat back and was like, that doesn't sound right. I have to be honest, I just kind of accepted that, I don't think that's right. And I didn't think too much about that. I don't know why. I always had an issue with this because it comes up a lot. Witnesses are increasingly incorporating their own religion into history, and why the history of humankind itself, in a way, is kind of a history of Jehovah's Witnesses, because it all ties into Jehovah's will for the earth, and the only ones doing that today are Jehovah's Witnesses. So when you think about it, it's kind of all about us. Witnesses do this a lot, and it always struck me as presumptuous. We hope that we have the truth, but what is our right for us to define that we are his? Like, you know what I mean? I guess no, and I guess that's why I'm supposed to be doing the video, to explain what's in my head. Why are we so insistent on not just being correct, but being prophesied and basically a part of the Bible? That always bothered me in a way. I don't know if it was haughtiness or like presumptiveness. I don't really know how I would define it, but it didn't feel modest, it didn't feel humble, and it really didn't feel true to me. Like, it felt like we were trying to jimmy it into something that wasn't necessarily there. Almost like somebody's like, see, we really are important, because look, we're even in the Bible if you think about it like this. And I can't explain why that never worked for me, but it didn't, and I always tried to understand the 1914 thing. That seemed slightly remarkable to me because World War I started in 1914, and, no one can just prophesy something like that has to be Jehovah. So I tended to accept that, but when we specifically got involved with, like, this prophecy in Revelation is actually about how some guys got let out of prison in 1919, that's when it felt like, is it though? How could we possibly know such a thing? And it just kind of got worse with the God's Kingdom Rules book, which I thought was really, really interesting just as a history of the organization, because the history of the organization is quite interesting. But whenever it tried to make like a scriptural application, it always felt a little hollow to me. This, for some reason, didn't strike me as a huge problem. It didn't strike me as like, well, that means it's not the truth. It always struck me as something that they were like adding on top of the truth. We know all of these doctrines are true, and so we're trying to like show how we must have been prophesied in some way. But I always thought that we shouldn't do that, and we should just let the teachings stand on their own, and it shouldn't matter if we're prophesied or not. So I would always like pray, not always, but when it came up and I would think about it and get a little bothered by it, I would pray to Jehovah to help the organization move away from that teaching, or to help me be convinced that it was right. And because I never was, I assumed that Jehovah was answering my prayer in the other direction. That I would not say was a big doubt. I did have one big doubt, though, and I want to say this happened probably when I was like 15. I started listening to the Ricky Gervais podcast. I have mixed feelings on old Ricky Gervais these days, but I loved that podcast. It's one of the first podcasts. It's so funny. Him, Carl Pilkington, and Stephen Merchant are great. But Ricky Gervais is an atheist. He doesn't talk about it much on the record, but if you get to know him a little bit, he'll confess this to you. He talked to Carl Pilkington about why Noah's Ark was a ridiculous story that didn't make any scientific sense, and like, look at how many millions of species of spiders there are. They couldn't have possibly all been on the Ark, and they couldn't have evolved that quickly. And that, I was like, It was like that meme of the girl tasting something? What's happening in that meme? I don't remember. That really did bother me, and I had to reconcile with that because the science, it really didn't make any sense. And I didn't do any extracurricular research. I wasn't looking up like, how much water would it take to flood the earth? And, how many species of animals are there? I didn't think that I was afraid, but I was. A part of me knew the consequences and subconsciously knew the consequences of disagreeing. So I never did extracurricular research, but just intuitively, it didn't seem like it really made sense. And so I did research in Watchtower publications. And eventually, I kind of came to the conclusion like, well, the reason why this story is incredible is because it is miraculous, and because we don't know how the animals got there and how it all worked. Like, I'm trying to criticize this fanciful miracle story about how an amazing thing that shouldn't happen did happen, and I'm trying to apply science to it. I'm missing the point. The point is that it's fantastic. Who knows how Jehovah worked it out? This is funny in hindsight because witnesses pride themselves on having an answer for everything. But it's not until you start questioning that you realize that a lot of the answers are, we don't know, but Jehovah's pretty amazing, and he worked it all out. I was okay with this, to be honest, and I also kind of fell back on the thing of like, well, even if maybe it's just a parable. And even if it's just a parable, who cares? It's a cool story. Not so much the chapters immediately following the Noah story. Two bigger things, though, actually really did bother me, to the point where I did know that this was a thing that I had to overcome. And again, I wouldn't even say that this was like, this means that it's not the truth. It was more like, I think that we're wrong about this. I want to believe the thing that we're teaching. So I really want to correct this doubt. But I don't think it ever occurred to me that like, if I'm right about the Watchtower being wrong about this, then that means that we don't have the truth. Because the truth is so much more all-encompassing than being correct. It is being correct and being chosen. It is being the vessel. It is being the channel that Jehovah is using. That's what it means to be in the truth. Two big things. One, the water canopy. This was one that was a huge thorn in my flesh, I must say. It just didn't make any sense to me, and I didn't know it existed. This is something that's it's a bit of a ghost teaching, a term coined by somebody I don't remember. There are some things that witnesses technically believe, but they kind of don't ever talk about it or acknowledge it, so it's kind of just understood to be like an Even by Watchtower's own standards of research, like, they kind of consider anything more than 10 years old to be an So I had never heard this, but somebody brought up, out in surface, the idea of the water canopy. This notion that there was some orb-like water shield, a scarif shield, if you will, around the entire Earth. It had never rained prior to the flood, and the reason why there was so much water was because of this water orb thing, and there was a controlled tropical climate all around the world up until this point. And somebody was telling me this out in service, somebody in the car group, and I was like, no, that does not make any sense. We don't believe that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It doesn't make any sense. And nope, it turns out we did believe that. I asked my parents about that, and I was like, have you ever heard this crazy thing? And they're like, yes. What's the problem? What are your concerns? I see a question in the back. My biggest concern with it was the fact that we believe that Jehovah stopped creating after the creative days, right? He didn't start inventing new stuff after his day of rest. And I'm hoping you didn't notice that I said he's instead of his. And so that would mean that he didn't actually invent snowflakes or penguins or the Arctic animals in general, because the entire existence of non-tropical climates was a mistake that happened. It wasn't how the world was meant to be. And that doesn't make any sense with the concept of the Bible. You know, snowflakes are always pointed to as an incredible example of Jehovah's beautiful design and creation, and yet he didn't create them, apparently. That was just like, oh shit, snowflakes, all right. That's a freebie. And the concept of rainbows. I think one of the first things I ever learned in the whole world was how rainbows work. You know, we learned that in kindergarten. They gave us prisms. They showed us how light refracts. And so you understand how rainbows work, even as a baby toddler. I had a little trouble accepting that the first rainbow didn't happen until the flood. That's kind of an inconvenient rain cycle, but they say no. There wasn't any rainbows before the flood because it never rained, you see. Which in a way is kind of like the galaxy brain move. It's like, aha, you think you stumped us with why there wasn't a rainbow before the flood? It never rained before the flood, dummy. How did the crops get watered? By morning dew that had spread throughout the atmosphere because the earth was covered in a water suit. I was very, very frustrated that we believed in something so blatantly unscientific and so unsubstantiated in the Bible. Surely when the Bible said the waters above the earth, they meant like rain, like clouds and stuff, because that's where the rain comes from. Like it would have seemed to ancient people like it's coming from above the earth. But no, secret water suit. I was very frustrated by this. The other thing that I had an issue with, and I believe this is exclusive content, I don't think I've talked about this, but I really had an issue with the idea of Jesus and Adam balancing out. And the way that witnesses teach it, Jesus was a ransom sacrifice to balance out the sin of Adam. Adam is Anakin, and Jesus is Luke Skywalker, you know, the sinful, fallen one, and then the redemptive son. And so that's how it worked, right? One perfect man was given the chance that Adam had, but he did everything right, and he was faithful to the death. Unlike Adam, he never fell into temptation. But I had a problem with this concept because I did not feel that Jesus was as tempted as Adam was, because Jesus wasn't married. Jesus didn't have a wife, didn't even have a girlfriend. Cuck, beta.
Jesus, have you even kissed a girl, bro?
Now, the reason why this is in my head is because I am a young teenage boy, and that means that just, it's boner city. Population my boner. So yeah, I have a lot of sexual urges. Oh boy, I hate talking about this. Let's move on from this as quick as possible.
I had sexual urges as a teenager.
So I was constantly suppressing that, not actually. The problem was I was failing to do that. And, you know, I was attracted to all sorts of people. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Jesus apparently never spanked it even one time, despite being a perfect man. He doesn't even flirt with anybody. Basically, my contention was, I can't imagine anything more tempting than frustrating horniness. So you're telling me that Jesus had every temptation known to man and didn't even, you know? Beyond that, like, I felt like Adam's struggle was so difficult because it was his wife. It was the only other human on planet Earth that was trying to, you know, tempt him, right? And that would be a way bigger trial than, like, Satan just actually coming to you being like, hey, it's me, Satan. You're on a diet? Yes, I'm on a diet. Eat some bread then. What? Eat the bread. I'm Satan. Eat some bread. Make the rocks into bread and worship me a little bit too. No, you're Satan, and I'm not gonna do that. This isn't even a trick. You're just telling me what you're trying to get me to do. Yeah, actually, this is not a great plan. Why don't I turn into animals anymore? Why don't you turn into animals anymore? That was probably your best trick, to be honest. No, the best trick, and you don't know this because it hasn't been invented yet, but my best trick was convincing the world that I don't exist, and you'll get to look forward to that in The Usual Suspects in the year 1993. At one point in my life, I thought this video might be just 1 hour long. That time has passed. So Jesus, you know, is tempted by Satan just coming to him, but Eve was tempted by, you know, an animal seducing her. And then, you know, Adam was seduced by his only other human being companion on Earth, who he had sex with and loved, and even said a poem one time. Did not feel equitable to me. This did not feel like scales balanced. This was not perfectly balanced as all things should be. Thanos 2018. And I expressed this to some people, and they were all like, never thought about that before. And it honestly is a weird thing to think about. I don't know why I thought about it a lot, but I did. And I was never able to get a good answer to it, to be honest with you. I guess the real way I reconciled it was I came to believe that the Adam and Eve account was a parable, but we'll get to that later. There's more, if you can believe it. There's going to be more later, more stuff even. The other big thing that I haven't talked about, but that was definitely a constant concern, was the fact that I had bisexual leanings, you might say. Like, leaning so hard that it is just, I am one. It's true, I consider myself to be a bi-man, the bi man. But I didn't really have that language as a young man in the organization, and I just felt kind of weird and bad a lot. And this also gave me a lot of sympathy and concern about our stance on the gay folks out there in these United States. And frankly, I'll say it, the world. I oddly had a lot of like bisexual encounters with my guy friends as a witness. And it's real weird that that just sort of happened, and I won't get into the TMI of it all. And it wasn't until a lot later in life that I realized, that's apparently that's not normal. Apparently not everybody has that happen and feels that way. So this made me feel pretty bad about our stance on homosexuality. And that's how witnesses define it, right? Like anything not straight is just defined as homosexuality. Really, I would say like their stance on LGBTQ issues. But that wasn't the language that I had at the time or would have used. So if I just fall back on the word homosexuality throughout this, just know that for witnesses, that includes like trans people, it includes non-binary people, it includes anybody who's just not cis and straight, basically. I knew some gay kids from a pretty young age, and just it doesn't take you long to realize that they're just like us, like the celebrities you read about in People magazine. Gay people. They're just like you and me. So I felt weird and bad about our stance on that being wrong and being outlawed. And in fact, in paradise, a perfect world would not include this homosexuality. 1P and 1V for all eternity. That's what we say in paradise. Or that's just the quote from the Watchtower. I know that I don't have the correct viewpoint on this, so I would pray to Jehovah to help me understand it and to help realign me with where I'm supposed to be. But it just never stuck. At best what would happen is I would just not think about it for long periods of time. And over the years, as representation in media got slightly better, still not super awesome, and wait for Disney to have the first gay character in a Disney movie, it was harder and harder to treat gay people like they were just some other, like they were just some mistaken and misguided group. And because I experienced attraction to both genders, I felt like I could very easily sympathize with their struggle. I knew that I could eventually one day get married and have kids, and that was always my goal. I wanted the kind of traditional family that my family had. I'd be able to do that one day, and I'd be able to exercise my urges. No, there's no good way to talk about that. My feeling. It's a feeling. That's, what if in The Rise of Skywalker, when they were talking about the Force and Rey and Finn would be like, a feeling. They meant like, my sexual urges. My sexual urges. And this is the one thing that I was never quite able to conquer, because it was in my mind a whole lot, as somebody who was one of the not straights deep down. About waist down, actually. So that was something that I just was never able to conquer, and I just hoped that I would one day just be able to let that thought fade away, and eventually I just kind of accepted that I disagreed with the organization on this, but hopefully eventually they would become more progressive. That was really my stance on it. I remember talking to elders about this a few times because I just wanted to understand, like, what am I missing here? What am I missing? Why should I hate this? Hate what Jehovah hates? I had an elder tell me one time, I find this quite gross in hindsight. He said, once you get married, you'll realize just how perverted and wrong homosexuality is. That's not how it's supposed to work. Which is so crass in hindsight. It's just like, hey, once you slide that P in the V, you're gonna realize very quickly that no D's should go in B's, and maybe they should go in B's, but not guy B's, that's for sure.
Your BF's about to get F'd in the B!
So I was just never really able to get over it, to be honest, and felt weird and bad every time it was brought up, but we'll get to that a little later in the video. Here's another big, crack in the windshield thing. If you can believe it, we are still in the crack in the windshield segment. If you look at your chapters, and boy, did I thought this section would be a lot shorter, and I may have paced out certain bits based on what I thought the timing would be, and now you're gonna notice some bits start to happen in the video. Boy, the timing is gonna be real weird. I was not allowed to go to college as a witness, and I didn't want to go to college for the most part, but the most annoyed I was to be a witness, I guess, was mostly when it came to not being able to date in school. That's the thing I wanted to do most. It's the thing I felt most ostracized by. And in hindsight, senior year of high school, probably the peak for me. It's all been downhill. So to think that my peak was wasted in celibacy, what a nightmare. But the thing that annoyed me was not being able to go to art school. I loved to do art, and I took college portfolio prep courses. I took my senior year, took courses with the purpose of which is to prepare your portfolio so you can submit it to art schools. So I did all of that. I did all the assignments and got good grades on it. But I just never submitted it anywhere because I wasn't allowed to because of my religion. And the reality is I hated school. I was never a good student. And I have ADHD. You might have trouble believing that. Check the video length. So I was just never a good student, and I don't learn well in that format. So I was not eager to go to college, but I was genuinely good and passionate about a couple of things: art and writing. My senior year, you have to do a project in school, like a senior thesis type thing. And so I did, and you had to produce some kind of creative work. And so I wrote a novel for my thing. I wrote and illustrated a young adult novel, and I had such a fun time doing it, and just scratched all the right creative itches for me, and just had a grand old time. And so for the first time, I felt I would go to school if it was like this. If I got to really study stuff that I'm passionate about, that would be exciting. And I couldn't, I couldn't go to school to be an English major or to go to art school or anything. And so I did feel resentful of that at the time. Realizing how much time you've lost is one of the things that you have to come to grips with when you leave a religion, because you realize it's not true. I wouldn't say that was a doubt, but what did happen was I went to community college just for a couple years to work in the medical field. And I just had a lot of time to kill and by myself. And so I started listening to podcasts to fill the air. And I quickly discovered this world of improv comedy podcasts, which I just became absolutely obsessed with. And I just would listen to Comedy Bang Bang and Improv for Humans and Hollywood Handbook and Jimmy Pardo's show and all these just great comedy podcasts. And first of all, it made me realize I really want to do improv. I really want to do that. It was one of the few moments in my life where I'm that's what I want to do. I want to take classes and do that. And that was the most tempted I ever felt to leave, to be honest. And I would even have fantasies about what if I left the organization for 2 years so I could go to LA and go to UCB and do improv. Dream big, kids. And I would think about that and I'd be no, of course not, I can't do that. But it was just one of those things that I knew I would be good at, and I just loved the form, long form improv. I just thought, and I still continue to think is the greatest magic trick in the world. And I think all of the best comedy that's happening now is happening in podcast form. So I'm like really passionate about it, and it felt bad to be in school for something that I didn't really care about that much, while realizing what my actual passion is and knowing that I could not pursue it because it would be seeking great things for myself. And meanwhile, I had really developed a love for writing, and I realized I was good at it. I got like a thing I wrote, like a personal essay or something. I got it published in the local paper. That was very exciting, and that my English teacher really fueled my passion for writing. And was always very disappointed that I never took advanced classes, but why would I? I'm not going to go to college because I'm going to pioneer when I get out of school. I love video games, so I started writing for some video game websites, including one that I won't name because I don't necessarily want people reading my old shitty video game reviews from when I was 19 years old. But I loved doing that, and it was, kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something that was like a little bit performative and a little bit creative, and I wanted it to be, centered around something I was passionate about. And so that felt really good, but also I knew I couldn't tell anybody about it because it was video games, and video games, boy, some of them are violent and some of them have magic, and some people care about that for some reason. And one of your primary concerns as a witness is not to stumble other people. It's not just that you have your idea and your conscience of what is acceptable and what isn't. It's that you have to worry about other people's consciences. So you're always going to have to cater to the most conservative consciences because they're the most easily offended, and you don't want to offend people. Since you're always going to have to surrender to the most conservative viewpoint, the unofficial stance is just don't do anything controversial, and if you do, just don't tell anybody about it. So I knew that this thing I was doing that I was really excited by, I couldn't tell anybody about, and I was very excited about this space. When I started writing about video games is when writing about video games really started to get big, and you had sites like Brainy Gamer and Kill Screen. All these little video game blogs started popping up, and people were talking about video game in art because BioShock in particular had kicked off these conversations, and it was a really exciting time. I wanted to be part of that community, and I saw a path forward. I was good at it. I got really great feedback from people I worked with, and so I thought, well, this could be it. This could be a career trajectory. But I knew it was something that could offend people, and that would be seeking great things for myself. It would be haughty. It would be drawing attention to me. In the back of my head, I'm also thinking people are going to ask me if I'm doing anything that involves a comment section or anything public. People are going to ask me about my thoughts on, gay people, for instance, or I'll have to comment on some political issue because a game deals with it. And what am I going to say? Am I going to say what I'm supposed to say? Do I feel comfortable saying what I'm supposed to say to people? And I realized I wasn't. When I would play out the scenario in my head of doing something where I expressed my opinion creatively in some way, or whatever I was going to do, or comedy, eventually I'm going to encounter viewpoints that I don't agree with, or that I do agree with, but I know I'm not supposed to. And I'm not comfortable telling people that I'm part of a religion that doesn't approve of gay people, because I don't actually believe that. I really don't. And I didn't. And I was okay with that, but if I said that publicly, that would get me in trouble, and I would probably get disfellowshipped. And worst of all, my dad would yell at me. And that would be the worst punishment of all. Stay tuned. So basically, I started to wind it down, and I stepped away from it, and it didn't really make any sense to people who I worked with, because I was just doing stuff one day, and the next I was I can't do this anymore, and it didn't make any sense to them. But it's because I was appointed as a ministerial servant, and I needed to be exemplary, and I wanted to make my parents happy, but specifically my dad. My dad and I are very similar in our personalities, but are not very similar in our interests. He's very into sports. Just classic jock guy. Knows about sports and how they work and what people are doing and how many points the game got last night. And I didn't. And that's what most of his conversations with his friends revolved around. And he would go out and play basketball, and I never wanted to do that stuff. but we could always connect on spiritual things. You know, I could keep up with conversations that way. Spiritual things really was the only way that me and my dad could have a conversation. And of course, I wanted to preserve that relationship. So that was really my motivating factor. And hey, Bo. So yeah, I stepped away from my dreams, basically. I stepped away from that and just really focused on being a ministerial servant and being used by Jehovah. And I went to a Spanish congregation for a couple of years. I even gave my first public talk in Spanish. My Spanish skills have atrophied, which bums me out, actually. It was really nice being fluent in another language.
By the way, I'm lowering my voice because I've now been talking for so long that it has gotten dark and there are sleeping people in the house. Just one other person, really, and some cats. But I felt like Jehovah richly rewarded me. I felt like I was being blessed spiritually, so it felt like not such a big deal. I felt like very validated in my worldview. And besides, I was in a relationship now with a girlfriend again. And that's what could go wrong, right? Everything's working out. Look at the blessing. Uh-oh. I don't want to dwell on this for too long because it's unpleasant to talk about, and this segment's going so long it's ridiculous. But it's kind of important. So I was in a relationship, and it was not healthy. This person was not in a healthy place in their life. And before we get into this, I want to say that I've forgiven this person for what happened. I don't harbor grudges against this person specifically, because I do think part of this comes from lack of education and the sort of repression that happens in the religion and unresolved trauma. Whatever, you can probably sense that I'm getting towards something not fun. I dated somebody who sexually assaulted me, and that was pretty tough. There was a time when we were alone. I know, JW elders, this is what we get for not having a chaperone 24/7. It's true. It's not true at all, by the way. Been on plenty of dates now without a chaperone. Turns out, rules. It's the best kind of date. It's almost like you shouldn't have a chaperone. But this was not a great experience for me. We were making out, and things started getting to a point where I was uncomfortable, and I said stop, and she didn't, and kind of kept going until it was over, right? And I felt very used and confused by that, and I felt like something bad had happened, but I didn't really even have the words to describe how I felt, and I felt weird about it. As she's walking away, sorry, this is a little dark, but in the interest of getting it out of my system, and in the interest of, if you've ever gone through something like this, you're not alone. She walked away and she's like, if you're not gonna, I don't know, pleasure me or whatever she said, if you're not gonna do that, then I guess we'll just have to look at porn. And that felt bad because that's also not okay according to Jehovah's Witnesses. So that made me feel real bad, and I went into quite a dark spiral of depression and confusion. She would be very verbally abusive as well. That was all quite bad, and eventually the relationship ended, as you might imagine. And the thing that was not great is we were in the same hall. The other thing that's not great is that it's just not really seen as a thing for that to happen to a guy, and that's just like in culture in general. Pop Culture Detective has a really good couple of videos on how male sexual violence is portrayed in media. It's always just treated as like a joke, right? As something that can't really happen. And that's kind of how I felt at the time, and I knew what would happen if I went to the elders about it. There's one example that witnesses always go to when it comes to fleeing from immorality, because that is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to flee from immorality, and that is not figurative. It is literally, you might have to run away from the sex thing that's happening, and you might have to just run like old Joseph, or not actually young Joseph. Joseph and the amazing Technicolor lady who wanted to sleep with him that one time. And that's the example that's always given, is some lady was coming on to Joseph, and he was like, no, lady, that's not cool. That's not chill. Girl, don't do that to me. And so he ran away and his garment was ripped, and then she blamed him and all the people went after him to kill him. And so he literally ran away, and this is always the example of like what you should do. And I didn't. I did not flee. I was, paralyzed and frozen and confused, and I didn't really understand what was happening. So I felt guilty about that, right? Like, I felt like it was my fault. Another reason why I didn't want to go to the elders was because we had gotten in trouble once before. And by gotten in trouble, I meant that we had gotten a little handsy, and I felt really guilty about it. And so I called the elders, like, immediately as I'm driving away from the scene of the crime. I'm like, I think I did a bad thing with my girlfriend. And that's what I sounded like, which I don't think helped my case. So we talked to the elders, and it was quite disturbing. We were together talking to them, so that's a little embarrassing. And they ask, as you might know, if you've been a Jehovah's Witness and you've been in one of these instances, and it's far worse if you're a woman, facing a tribunal of old, creepy men who are strangers, or maybe even worse, people who know you really well, and they're asking really, really personal, gross questions about the sexual misdeed that has happened. They ask, and I say this in all meanings of the word, probing questions. So that was unpleasant, and did not make me eager to go to the elders. And the reality was, I knew that I felt so conflicted and guilty and weird about this, but I also knew that I couldn't just tell the elders, because that meant that she would get roped into the situation, and she might get in trouble, and the reality is we would probably both get in trouble. But no matter what would happen, I would almost definitely lose my privileges, and that would be really, really hard for me. I just was not ready to do that. My entire life was defined by being a servant. I had kind of given up a lot of things to be a servant, and I really liked it. I really liked serving the congregation. I liked being of use. I really enjoyed carrying microphones and helping the older sisters with, getting the JW library on their iPads and stuff. I just liked the whole thing. I liked feeling needed in the world, a unique feeling. That's kind of an interesting thing about me. I like feeling needed. So I just, I didn't go to the elders. I went into quite a dark spiral of depression and started drinking kind of heavily for the first time in my life, like regularly after work, coming home and just kind of drinking myself to sleep, and that was something that I had never done before. It was real bad, and I think on top of all that, there's also just this sense that, like, you don't ever hear experiences in the Watchtower and Awake of people dating more than once. Usually it's like, I waited my whole life for the right person, and then I found the right person, because we date with a view to marriage. So obviously, we got married. The end. Or I had one bad experience, and I almost made the mistake of staying with this person, but I didn't. And the next person I dated, that was the right one. So you kind of get two, maximum, as a witness. And I dated like four people or something. I dated a few folks. I got around in my witness days. I kissed almost a handful of people. A real Johnny Bravo I was, and not just the big swoopy hair. What is this anymore? Being in the same congregation as this person was hard, because I saw them multiple times a week, and I'm also giving parts from the platform. I'm on stage quite a bit, and seeing this person in the audience, right? And it's very awkward for me and for everybody, because everybody knew that we dated, and then everybody knew that we broke up. What a scandal. Every little thing is a scandal, and this is a slightly above the middle thing, so it was quite scandalous. Two people dated and didn't get married. Somebody call the news update desk at Jehovah's Witness headquarters. They have news updates. I don't know. Maybe they would be interested in this story. And I would just have these horrible, overwhelming feelings of worthlessness, being on the stage, reading the Watchtower or something, and thinking, I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to be a servant. I have sinned. I've done something horrible. I'm lying to everyone all the time. And another thing that you're told as a witness is that if you cover over a transgression, or if you try to hide it, I should say, and don't express it to the elders, it will come out eventually, because Jehovah has a way of revealing these things. But it can grieve the spirit of the congregation. It can actually block the Holy Spirit of the congregation. Like, you're radiating a dark aura that is preventing the light from like fully permeating the congregation. It's a lot like the force-sensitive Islamiri in the Thrawn trilogy, which form a force-sensitive, force-resistant barrier around people, and that's why Thrawn needs so many of those special lizards, and that's why he's able to interact with Sebaioth without being affected by the dark Jedi powers. This is before the Sith. They were called Dark Jedi. Multiple girlfriends. More than one person was willing to tolerate this for at least a little bit. So anything that would ever go wrong at the meeting, I would think, is that me? Is that, like, me blocking the Holy Spirit? Would the Holy Spirit have prevented that talk from being kind of weird and bad if it wasn't for me blocking it? So I would just feel awful, and I would want to die, and I just had panic attacks and breakdowns all the time. And eventually, talking to some friends, they helped me to realize that it really was not my fault, and what happened was not okay, and I was taken advantage of. And so, I mean, that was slightly comforting because I felt like, well, at least I'm not like covering over a sin or transgression, right? But I still would feel guilty a lot. The paradox here, though, is like I would get privileges. After I broke off the relationship with this person, I started to get more and more privileges. I even got to go to Warwick to help build the world headquarters. I had a very small monkey business role. I didn't do anything. I didn't do any skilled labor because I don't have any, but I did some unskilled labor, and that was considered to be an immense honor. And honestly, it was a blast. It was a really fun time. I love working construction for free for long hours for religious organizations. That's what does it for me, guys. But at the time, it felt like a wonderful privilege, and it felt like a confirmation that I had been forgiven, that I was on the right path. And that was completely contradictory with these feelings of like self-loathing and guilt. I think what that is, in hindsight, was just, it was unresolved trauma. I didn't talk about this with anybody. I was repressing it, and I didn't really have a way of dealing with it. I barely had the language to describe what I was feeling. But I didn't have a healthy outlet for those things, because there's also a culture against therapy in the organization. Even though they're slightly starting to change it, there's still definitely a stigma against it. And beyond that, I'm still indulging in some good lord, I don't know how to talk about this stuff in a way that's not weird. I'm doing the sorts of things that people do when they're single and bored and laying around, and feeling guilty about that. Constant feelings of like guilt and worthlessness combined with feeling really great and like I'm getting privileges. And that kind of felt like, well, is this a test? Like, is this Jehovah testing me? Like giving me stuff that I don't deserve to see if I'll take it? I don't know. I don't know what kind of tricky tests that old Sky Pappy's up to. But I began to take comfort in something that was said by a circuit overseer during a visit. And if you're not aware, the circuit overseer is sort of like a traveling representative for Watchtower proper. They're kind of a way of monitoring the congregations, making sure that nobody's getting out of line. They provide some encouragement. They give some, special talks throughout the week, hang out with the sheep, go out in field service, and they meet especially with the elders and the servants. And this is generally the times like when they'll talk about if they're going to appoint somebody as an elder or a ministerial servant or whatever, or if there's any complicated congregation matters. But during one of these visits, I'm in the privileged position of getting to sit in on the elders and servants meeting. It's seen as an exclusive thing. He talks about, as they often do, the miraculous ways in which Jehovah will reveal your secret pornography habit, so you better just tell us now and save yourself even more embarrassment. It's weird how God works, He'll, on one hand, he'll always reveal it, so you should, even though he will anyway. Like they'll tell some crazy story about this. This guy had all these ways of concealing things, but then this crazy butterfly effect of events happened, and like, oh my god, his wife found out about his secret habit and he was removed as an elder. So don't let that be you, kids. Tell your local elders so that they can still do the same thing and disfellowship you, but you get to be the one to tell them. But the point was, Jehovah knows what's going on, and he reveals things in his time. And so I thought, well, you know what? I feel that I've been forgiven for this, if I ever needed to be forgiven in the first place. And I'm receiving privileges. I'm doing my best. So I clearly have Jehovah's blessing in some way. I just need to leave this in Jehovah's hands, and he will reveal this in its time. To this day, it has yet to be revealed, and until now, so let me open the envelope and reveal who it was that assaulted me. No, I'm not going to do that today. You got to sign up for Patreon. So the fact that that never got brought up was concerning at first, but also I think of the way I eventually resolved it was like, well, maybe the answer is that it shouldn't have been revealed because she was, forgiven in some way too, and like, she was a victim of abuse herself, and the guilt of it was punishment enough. And I frankly don't really love the whole discipline system in the organization anyway, so it's not like I was really hoping that someone get disfellowshipped for all this. But yes, going long stretches of time feeling guilty and miserable and dark and unworthy, and that wasn't great. But weirdly enough, that didn't wake me up. That actually pulled me in closer. This event happened about the week that JW Broadcasting started in 2014, and I just saw that as like food at the proper time. That was Jehovah's hand. That's exactly what I needed. This years worth of planning this giant television production came together specifically for me. Isn't you think about that stuff, and it's actually a little selfish, the food at the proper time thing. Like, oh, isn't that nice that all these people came together and wrote a Watchtower article just for me right now today? So that all felt bad, and I started to get on a path that I felt really validated by. I felt like I was where I wanted to be spiritually, and I stopped looking for a mate. And of course, what they say is when you stop looking, that's when you find it. And I did. I met my now wife, and it was legitimately love at first sight. I didn't even know if I believed in that, but I do now that I've experienced it. It was just amazing. And like after our first conversation, reconnecting, because we knew each other kind of tangentially years earlier. We reconnected and just saw each other from across the hall, literally. Like, we locked eyes and were like, hey. And by the end of that conversation, I was like, I could marry that person. I think I will, probably. I think I'm going to marry her. And I did. And she apparently had the same feeling. So our courtship moved really fast. Now, dating as a witness is really crappy because you have to have a chaperone all the time. So it's quite a hassle. Like, you can't just get together and hang out with your cool new makeout buddy. You gotta, like, arrange a chaperone to make sure that they're not actually your makeout buddy. Or they are, but they're cool, but I don't know. It's really annoying. So you're constantly having to intentionally arrange a third wheel for your dates, and nobody wants to do that because it sucks. Meeting my wife in this way and connecting on such like an intense like emotional level and friend level and just like chemistry was just like Walter White over here. It was just everything I had ever wanted and prayed for. I get married in January 2018, and I am in just marital bliss. Our marriage is awesome immediately, and we just kind of are killing it in the congregation. We're the golden couple. Everybody in the congregation kind of wanted us to get together, and we did. I'm a servant. I'm out giving public talks, and I've got this witness wife who supports me. It is the picturesque witness lifestyle. It is frankly everything I've ever wanted in the organization, short of becoming an elder, which I am well on my way to doing. In fact, before I started dating my now wife, the elders had asked me, if there was anything holding me back from becoming an elder. They wanted to work with me to get me to that point. And I had told them that I needed to work on my Bible reading. And the reality is that was not what was holding me back. The thing that was holding me back was feeling intense guilt and confusion over the assault that had happened. And I just was mentally in a place where I was just freaking out, and I worried that I would have to counsel somebody on that I would have to counsel like some young person on masturbation, for instance. And
not feel comfortable doing so because I'm doing the same thing. So that kind of stuff was holding me back before. No longer. I am married, which always solves every problem. That's one of the things they don't tell you. Married people, they don't have problems. It's amazing. So everybody should get married as young as possible. And ideally, just purely base it around religious beliefs, because those will never change. I'm doing great. And I am noticing a couple of things. One, we're not going out in service a ton. And I'm feeling totally fine about that. Every Saturday we have, we're just like, you want to just sleep in and get some breakfast? And we do. And it's delightful. And I'm wondering why I don't feel more guilty. You know, shouldn't I want to be out in service more? But I don't. I find myself really not wanting to do it. And I'm not quite sure why that is. But I'm kind of realizing that I just have never really liked going out in the ministry. And I'm finding it harder and harder to do so now that I have somebody with me who I love spending all my time with. And why would I spend my Saturday morning doing something I don't enjoy when I could just hang out with my best friend and do something fun? But that's more in the background, and that's something that we just need to work on as a family, right? We need to work on our ministry attendance. That gives us a spiritual goal to work on. What happens in, I believe, March 2018, I'm gesturing now using the little stand that I can put my webcam on. I'm showing the broadcast at the Kingdom Hall at the beginning of the month. We would do this for older folks in the congregation who didn't have the internet in their homes or just weren't confident enough to get on JW Broadcasting in their own home. So we would show it on a Saturday afternoon at the Kingdom Hall on a projector. So I'm showing the broadcast, and it is a broadcast that brings me to attention. Garrett Loesch is talking about a great many things, including rumors. What if we start hearing rumors about branch office people or the governing body even? And boy, am I leaning forward in my seat because this sounds scandalous.
Satan also has the scheme to spread rumors about faithful brothers, including the faithful slave.
And if there's one overarching thing that is always making me feel a little bit uncomfortable, it's just knowing that there's stuff out there that I'm a little nervous about. And I know that I'm afraid to look at it, but, I just find ways to cope with that and not think about it. So Garrett Loesch is giving this talk, and he says,
avoid sensationalism by saying something like, can you believe what I heard about this matter, or this person, or that person, referring to a statement that may have appeared on
Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
There's stuff out there on social media that's spreading around like wildfire. Don't look at it. Famously, a thing to say to get people to not do something. Hey, there's a machine in the corner with a big red button on it. Don't hit the red button. People are going to hit the red button. And that's basically what he's doing. He's like, hey, there's a big shiny red button out there with information you shouldn't know written on it. And just don't hit that, please. He says if we receive that, like if somebody sends it to us, or we stumble across it, we shouldn't spread it to anyone else, because that might weaken their faith. And then he says,
this is not to say that the slave is perfect and never makes mistakes, but Jehovah and Jesus trust the imperfect slave who cares for things to the best of his ability and with the best of motives.
Shouldn't we then trust the imperfect slave as well?
I just remember sitting back in my chair and thinking, that's not right. That makes me feel real weird. Hey, there's a lot of stuff on the internet about me. You shouldn't read it. It's all lies. And even if you do see it and it seems like it's real, don't tell anybody else, because, then they're gonna hate me too. Invisible creatures trust me, so should you. By the way, I'm the only source you have on whether or not the invisible creatures trust me. I don't think I thought of it in quite so cynical of a way, but I was really disturbed by that. I had received an apostate email years before, and had just prayed about it and stopped worrying about it. At the very bottom of this email is a thumbnail of a video that shows Jeffrey Jackson in some kind of court setting. I had no idea what this was, and I did not click on it. But I was very conscious of the fact that I was afraid to click on it. And this is Jeffrey Jackson. I know it's him, and he's definitely in a setting that is not JW Broadcast Studios. I was afraid to click on it, and I did not like that I was afraid to click on it, because that meant that there was information out there that somebody else is able to view that I am too afraid to view. Somebody else knows something about my religion that I don't know, and I'm afraid to know. And in my mind, I'm like, well, that could have been doctored, could have been a clip taken out of context, and of course, that is what Gary Loesch said.
Sometimes reference is made to certain quotes, and readers then think, how can a quote be a rumor? A quote can be taken out of context.
Critical reports often give only part of a matter and leave out other aspects. Often such rumors play on the emotions.
I had forgotten about that email for the most part, but every once in a while, when somebody said something a little odd or a little culty, I would think about that email and think, that's kind of weird. But it was very easy to stow that away and dismiss it. But now that I had a cult leader telling me, hey, there's some interesting thumbnails out there you might see, in emails for instance, we really don't want you watching them, because quotes can be taken out of context. We're all imperfect. We all say things in court proceedings about child sexual abuse that we regret or don't. Don't watch it. Don't form your own opinion. Felt bad. And suddenly, I was very, very conscious of the fact that this is a guy who gets to write the scripts for his videos and talk into a camera to 8 million people and tell us to trust him no matter what. Don't trust your lying eyes, trust me. I was really disturbed by it, and it haunted me for a long time. This happened early 2018, and I didn't wake up until 2019. So, like late 2019. So for over a year, I am overwhelmed with the feeling that something is not right. Every meeting I go to, I feel a little bit disconnected. Sometimes I feel normal, but a lot of times I just feel like something isn't clicking with me. Something is a little bit wrong. I start to notice more and more that the broadcasts are very manipulative.
I tried to contact them. I just wanted to talk and to hear their voice. I missed being with my family. And they thought about reaching out to me. But they knew that if they had associated with me, even a little, just to check on me,
that small dose of association might have satisfied me.
I had always been a bit of a snob when it came to, like, teaching in the congregation. Like, if a brother gave an illustration that didn't make sense, I was always critical of it. Like, is that really the best we can do? But it was easy to dismiss because this is just brother so-and-so. He is just a humble guy. He works a normal 9-to-5 job like the rest of us, and then he, tries his best to serve Jehovah. So maybe he's not the best speaker, but he has other gifts in the congregation, right? He's not a professional teacher. He's just relying on the Holy Spirit. But when the bad teaching is coming from the teaching committee in a JW broadcast episode, you maybe start to suspect that the reason why the teaching is bad is because the teaching is bad.
Like a piece of garbage.
The speaker isn't bringing out any depth in the subject matter because the depth just isn't there. I would always really hate like sweeping statements, generalizations, or like the way that watchtowers use data but they never cite a source. And for some reason, it was just more striking to see it in video form. Like, when you're reading something, at least for me, it was easy for my eyes to drift across the page without really taking in the information and allowing myself to overlook it. But when you're hearing it coming directly from the people taking the lead in the organization, it's much harder to dismiss because these are the representatives of God teaching you, and the teaching is unconvincing and weird, and it doesn't necessarily make sense. And sometimes it involves, like, garlic bread for some reason.
This bread is ruined.
The convention videos are even worse. The convention always so enjoyable up until now. But now, I'm looking at these videos and listening to these talks and thinking, this is shallow.
Paul says, avoid them. That doesn't mean reading apostate literature or searching social media to see what they're saying about us.
not only is it like simplistic and embarrassing, it's also something that we're encouraged to invite people to watch. Like, you're encouraged to invite people to the convention. Am I willing to invite somebody to watch this garbage? You know, I was a part of a Christian religious group that did not approve of gay people, and that really bothered me, but we were the right one, and we didn't like the homosexuals for the right reason. Feels bad. Like, I think that's another part of it that I was dealing with some dissonance on, is like, they're talking about me. So it was crappy and bad and didn't make sense. And yet, we're supposed to applaud afterwards. And like, seemingly every demonstration was like this at the 2018 convention. One of them was about shunning from the parents' point of view of how tragic it is. They had a son who disassociated from the religion. Imagine such a thing. Hi, Mom and Dad.
It was like watching a movie of someone else's family. Then, as hard as the past few weeks had been, it just got harder. I knew what the Bible said about quit mixing in company.
Dear Mom, heart, cheeseburger, pizza, hot dog, ice cream cone, 12 p.m.
With anyone who is not living according to Christian standards.
But I never thought that scripture would one day apply to me.
And in this demonstration, you know, they show the son like writing a letter and handing it in, and then it's announced from the meeting, so-and-so is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and then it shows him walking away and the parents crying, oh, so sad. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, he just wrote a letter. Why did they announce that he's like disfellowshipped? It had never occurred to me that you couldn't just leave, and I thought that can't be right. So I was sitting there, I reach my book bag, I pull out my Organized to Do Jehovah's Will book, the rule book, the policies and procedures that we love so much, we carry it close to our hearts, and I look up and sure enough it says, we treat disassociated ones in the same way that we treat disfellowship people. And it hits me in that moment that I can never leave for any reason. I can't just walk away. You know, I'm already dealing with this really big dissonance when it comes to LGBTQ rights. I know that I disagree with the organization's stance on this. And I guess some part of me thought, well, if I need to walk away for some reason, I could just not be active. But, you know, I don't have to be disfellowshipped or anything. And now it's clear to me, like, no, if you just want to leave, too bad, so sad. And I don't know why this had never occurred to me before. I'm like a grown adult who's a ministerial servant. It probably should have, but it's really never acknowledged in the religion that there are people who want to leave for conscientious reasons. It is always that they are bitter, they are offended, they were stumbled, or they have been misled, and they are angry, and they want to pull people out of the religion because their mind has been warped in some way by Satan. But I knew in my heart that there was a fundamental disagreement that I had that seemed to be like irreconcilable, and yet that was just too bad, and I would just have to shut up about that. And that just made me feel real bad. So I walked away from that convention feeling pretty bad. And the end of the convention, meanwhile, was the Courage video. This video, quite the sensation. It's a dramatization of the Great Tribulation, a period of time that witnesses prophesy will happen, wherein the government, all the governments around the world, turn against all religions, including Jehovah's Witnesses, but Jehovah's Witnesses are the only ones still worshiping. And so they will be the lone true worshipers of Jehovah. Governments will come after them, SWAT teams and so forth. And so there's this video that they show accompanying this song, which, gonna be honest, is epic and inspiring. And I wish it was about like, Star Wars, give me Star Wars. Like, if it was about something that wasn't the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses, I would blast that song. It kind of rules. They're playing this very inspiring, emotional music and showing this reenactment of SWAT teams chasing Jehovah's Witnesses into a forest, and Jesus, heavenly Jesus, riding his celestial steed and firing a light arrow and wiping out the SWAT team. And everybody's watching this and crying, including my wife. You know, everyone's just sobbing. And I'm crying too, because I'm watching this thinking, like, this is crazy. This is not going to happen. This is what I'm supposed to believe in. This does not connect with me anymore. I knew that was wrong. And so for the next over a year, I'm just kind of miserable, to be honest. I'm just going through the motions. So I started saying no to stuff, including like public talks. Like I would always, if anybody needed a substitute, I would always give a public talk at a last minute notice. And I started saying no because one of the talks that I gave was about the main theological core of Jehovah's Witness beliefs, which is Jehovah's right to rule mankind, universal sovereignty. I did a video on it. So in trying to, give this public talk and explain it, I felt less and less convinced that it was true every time I gave it. And I couldn't really put my finger on why, but what kind of God is that obsessed with their own name and reputation? Why is it that important that he's right? We don't like people like that, and like, I'm this kind of person. This is something that I try to work on. Like, people who always have to be right about everything are annoying. People who are obsessed with their name and their reputation, boo. We call these people like narcissists. But that's the kind of God they're saying we serve, who is so obsessed with a challenge to his leadership by a disgruntled coworker that he's like, okay, well, we'll just let babies die for thousands of years, and that's fine by me. So it just didn't work for me. And the reality is, I knew enough about science to know that, hey, mankind's probably more than 4,000 years old, right? Or 6,000 years old, or however long they say it is. And meanwhile, by the way, I'm praying fervently about these things to try and reconcile this stuff. I just come to the conclusion that, this is a parable. The Adam and Eve account, the flood account, all these things I've had little issues with over the years, there's no reason to think that they're literal. They're impossible. And of course, part of the point is that they're impossible because miracles happen, right? But no, there's just no way that it's real. And like, all of my issues with these passages go away if they're simply parables. And so in my head, I was okay with that. I was kind of okay with just keeping that to myself. And it also felt like I'm praying about this. And this seems to be the answer that I'm getting, because I'm looking at the reasoning from the publications. This does not make sense. I'm reasoning it through using the Bible. This does make sense. So you'd think you'd go with the Bible answer. Just me. And I'm praying about my issues with the organization's stance on like homosexuality, right? And I just come to the conclusion, I don't think Jehovah cares about this. I think the organization is wrong. And so I'm praying for them. I'm praying for Jehovah to like move the organization to change their stance on this. I also am blessed with a Bible study. This Bible study is progressive. They're great. They're at the point where they should be getting baptized. And this person was raised around the witnesses, and it's just always kind of been in and out. So it wasn't like somebody I met in the door-to-door ministry. I was kind of gifted a Bible study. It was passed on to me, bequeathed unto me, and but it was going great, and we always had good discussions. But he wasn't getting baptized, and so you're supposed to kind of pry and insert and ask why that is. And the person I'm studying with basically says, well, it's because of I'm struggling with masturbation. This is a single guy who's in college at the time, in his early 20s. Of course he is, right? He says he's struggling with this, and he says that he's talked to the elders, and they don't have an issue with it. That is not something that can prevent you from getting baptized. Obviously, they're not okay with it, but it can't prevent you from getting baptized. But he feels so guilty about it because he knows it's wrong, and according to the publications, it is. And I'm sitting there like, dude, who gives a shit? Like, we all did, man, it's fine. But I can't say that. I have to preach the company line. And the company line is no bueno. I don't remember what I said. Apparently he found it encouraging. But suddenly I'm like, I don't feel comfortable teaching this stuff anymore. And I'm going out in the ministry less and less. Because what if I knock on the door of a gay person? And they're like, hey, your religion's homophobic. What am I going to say? I agree. I think that we should change that. And I don't think that you should join until we do. Not a great sales pitch. Meanwhile, of course, I'm married and I have to be a spiritual head, and I'm doing a bad job of it. I'm not leading family worship, and she doesn't care because family worship is boring, so we're just having fun. But you're not supposed to have fun when you're married. You're supposed to do family worship. So I feel bad about all this stuff. And the thing that turned the corner for me was some YouTubers. And this is why I do YouTube now. There's a couple things. Innuendo Studios is doing videos on the alt-right, and he has a series called the alt-right playbook, and basically how people are indoctrinated, right? And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, this indoctrination sounds a little familiar. And that's not to say that like witnesses are fascist or something. That's not true. But the indoctrination techniques were a little striking. The thing that made me break down crying was an H Bomber Guy video on flat earthers. And the conclusion of it, after this funny video, kind of dunking on a silly conspiracy theory, is really appealing to the hearts and minds of flat earthers and saying, these people have recognized something really true, which is that there is something fundamentally wrong with the world. And you can't trust the government. Like, they don't have your best interests in mind, and they do lie about stuff. And there are a lot of problems in the world. And it does seem like there's something going on, but they're putting these kind of like good intentions to change the world, and they're kind of like aiming their good intentions in this really conspiratorial place. And that just killed me, because I thought, that's me. That could be me. And if it was, I have no way of knowing, because I am too afraid to check if I'm right or not. Because if I'm wrong, that means the loss of everything that I love and hold dear, and that's not possible. So that is terrifying me. And then ContraPoints. ContraPoints, Natalie Wynn, is a wonderful YouTuber, trans YouTuber. Her videos have been recommended to me, but I always avoided watching them because I was like, well, I don't really know anything about the trans community. I think that they're valid. I had a trans friend in school, but if I start thinking about this stuff, I already struggle with this organization's stance on homosexuality. I know that they don't think transness is okay, so I don't want to have another thing I struggle with. And I remember, I heard myself think that, and I realized, what is wrong with you? You're worried that you're going to become, more compassionate about a marginalized group of people? What have you become? So I was like, screw it, I'm going to watch a cool YouTuber. And Natalie's videos are absolutely astounding. I will never make anything remotely as good, nor will anybody, frankly. But Natalie is able to explain really complex things in a way that's so simple and funny and dynamic and theatrical, but is also redefining something that I, of course, always saw as black and white and binary, male and female, and explaining how complicated that is. And this is something that most people have already figured out, but for me, turns out there's a lot of spectrums in life. For me, having this thing that I'd always seen as black and white be exposed is so complicated, and also just hearing incredible reasoning backed up by logic and facts, how liberating that was. Something that a larger thing that I'm noticing is I'm watching a lot of videos that are people debunking conspiracy theories or political opinions, right? And what I never see is somebody like H Bomber Guy going, look, there's flat earthers out there. Don't read any of their stuff. Don't watch their videos because they're wrong, but they'll trick you and then you'll be a flat earther. No, he knows that they're wrong and ridiculous, so he will express their arguments, present the best possible version of their argument, and then tear it down. And why aren't we doing that as witnesses? If we have the truth, why aren't we just engaging with what these criticisms are and then debunking them? If people can do this with political theories and ideologies, why can't we do this with whatever lies are being spread about witnesses? It just became overwhelming. In one day, me and my wife had watched the finale of The Leftovers, which is a great show, and it's emotional, and it's also about like religion and belief and stuff. I turned over to my wife later that night, and I was like, I got to talk to you about something. And I had never expressed this out loud. I had just kept this inside, and meanwhile, I'm just like having nervous breakdowns all throughout the year. I'm like just crying, and I'll just be in the break room at work, and A&E will be on. I'll see a trailer for Leah Remini's Jehovah's Witness special and be like, crap, well, there's another thing I'm afraid to watch. And the thing that really did it in for me was NPR Fresh Air, which I've listened to like every day since I was a kid. They did an interview with Amber Scora, who wrote a book. And I didn't know who this person was, but the description in my podcast feed was like a former Jehovah's Witness talks about her former faith. And I was like, now I'm afraid to listen to Fresh Air with Terry Gross, like the most like milquetoast interview show in the world. Like what? That was kind of the final straw for me. I'm like, no, you know what? I cannot be too afraid to listen to NPR. So I just felt completely overwhelmed. I turn to my wife. I say, I've just been really afraid. And I'd never expressed this out loud before. And I just told her I was so afraid because I've had issues with X, Y, and Z doctrine, and I'm just not sure if I believe anymore. And of course, that was a very emotional conversation, but the important thing was I said, I don't know if I believe anymore. And I finally said that out loud. I'd never said it out loud before. I never expressed it before. And once that was out there, once I had said that out loud, it became real to me. And I realized it's over. I mean, I don't think this is true. And beyond that, I didn't care. I didn't care if it was true anymore. I just was so fundamentally opposed to the homophobia and transphobia in the religion that I just was like, I don't think that paradise is for me. I would rather live and be wrong and love all these people equally than live in bigotry forever. And I just was overwhelmed by that, and especially with this concept that I couldn't deal with the fact that somehow my love was more accepting than God's. The God of infinite love and compassion is like, yeah, except for them though. Like, I'm a little concerned about what they're doing with their genitalia in their spare time. I don't love that. I didn't make it for that. So how dare they? Like, why is my love more accepting than God's? And the reality is, I didn't think that it was, because I prayed about these things, and I felt that I had God in my life. Like, I felt like Holy Spirit, and I felt faith, but I felt totally disconnected from the witness version of that, and I was like, I don't think that God actually thinks that this is important. I think that witnesses are wrong about God. But if not, I'm happy to take it up with him. He can talk with me anytime. Seems to be a one-way street communication-wise. So I just was like, okay. So that night, I decided to take a little peek at NPR.com. So I went to NPR. I knew that they posted transcripts of their interviews that they do on Fresh Air. So I looked up a transcript of the interview with Amber Scora. I was too afraid to listen to it. Like, her words, hearing them would somehow be more powerful than reading them. And I read the transcript. Frankly, it wasn't that salacious. It seemed pretty reasonable. It just seemed like a person who used to be a witness and just doesn't believe anymore. And so I went on Reddit. So I started clicking around. Frankly, I was more just encouraged by the existence of that abbreviation than anything. Like, the posts were whatever, and it must have been a good day on the subreddit because there wasn't too much anger and vitriol. But I like YouTube. I was most interested in what videos out there, and I'm like, I gotta find that thumbnail. What was that thumbnail from all those years ago? So I searched something weird in the YouTube search bar, like Jeffrey Jackson deposition, and the thing that came up that interested me was an interview that XJW5th did with a man named Ben, who used to write for the magazines. He was a researcher and writer for the Awake magazine. And that's how it was put in the title, and so I was like, well, that sounds pretty cool. I started listening to it very tentatively, right? Very ready to turn it off. And I can't tell you how much, how comforted I felt by that. I have since been able to talk with Ben, and he's one of the sweetest, kindest people I've ever talked to. He's just a wonderful person, and he just sounded so sincere, and it was clear that this was not a bitter, hateful person. This was a guy who was just really disappointed that it turns out that his religion wasn't true, and that's how I felt, right? And so I listened to his story, and he mentioned something called the Australian Royal Commission that Jeffrey Jackson was a part of, and I was like, aha, that must have been the thing I saw. So I'm like up all night watching stuff. But the next day at work, I pull up the Australian Royal Commission and listen to it while I'm working, and it's game over from there. You know, listening to Jeffrey Jackson lie about the religion in order to cover up child sexual abuse is not a great experience, to be honest. You know, it's very upsetting and disappointing, and yeah, I was so upset after that. And so then it starts, you know, the whole thing starts. I hear people talk about crisis of conscience. I start reading that, and I start going down the rabbit hole. At work, I am listening to Lloyd's videos, XJW Fifth, the Shunned podcast, listening to just hundreds of experiences, spending a bunch of time on the XJW Reddit, and really feeling quite liberated by this, you know, feeling excited, but of course increasingly angry at all the injustices and cover-ups happening that I've been lied to about. It's horrific, you know, that we're told that we stand apart from all false religions, particularly the Catholic Church. We used to lambaste the Catholic Church, and, you know, then to find out that we're no better. We have the same exact kinds of scandals, but just on a smaller scale because we're a smaller religion, is horrifying. And I was especially betrayed by the 1914 thing. Obviously less important in the grand scheme of things, but it's the one that just, like, baffled me the most. 1914, if you're not aware, is an incredibly important date for Jehovah's Witnesses. It is the date that they assert Jesus began invisibly ruling in heaven. And that, you get to that through some complicated math, but the math involves the year 607 BC. That's the year that Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians. And if you calculate from that year, you get to 1914. Based on a dream and Daniel and math, because God loves, above all else, algebra. I was never any good at math. I hate math. I hate numbers. So, frankly, I just always kind of trusted him on that. Like, I trust that your math works out. And the issue is not, as it turns out, that the math doesn't work out. It's that Jerusalem didn't fall in 607. It fell in 587. And you just would never think to double check that, because why would anybody make that up? Why would anybody lie about that? Unless you had already prophesied that 1914 was really important, and you had based your entire power structure off of the 1914 doctrine, because you asserted that in 1919 Jesus appointed Jehovah's Witnesses as the true religion on earth, and you only get to 1919 from 1914, and, you know, this is just all so crazy. And, you know, to describe it now, it's unfathomable to believe that I ever bought any of this. But it's not that you have to buy into that to become a Jehovah's Witness. You know, you are born a Jehovah's Witness. You know that that's the truth. And part of the truth is 1914. So you accept it because you accept all the other stuff. So that's true too. So feeling betrayed, feeling liberated, feeling terrified. These are all emotions that are happening simultaneously, but above all else, it's despair. It's just a complete pit of despair, because now I have replaced the old Armageddon with a new one. Except this one, I know is real. My parents will shun me. My sister will shun me. My family is going to cut me out of their lives. That is the new impending doomsday that I know for a fact is coming as soon as I officially make it official. Living with the knowledge that your own mother only loves you as much as your religion, and if you ever express that disagreement openly, she would shun you. Like, living with that knowledge feels bad. It feels really bad to know that the people in your life only love you insofar as you agree with them on their religious beliefs. So I would call my mom just sobbing, inconsolably crying, saying, "You're gonna shun me one day." And she didn't even have any idea what I was talking about because I was just babbling nonsense. And but I was a mess. I was a complete mess. And for not the first time, the most I've ever felt this, I was suicidal. I was in a really, really dark place. I really felt like it would just be easier for everybody if I died being the person that they thought I was. If I died as the perfect witness, then they never had to come to grips with the real me. They never had to go through the far worse loss, which is your son doesn't think that Jehovah's Witnesses are the one true religion anymore. If I just let my car veer off the highway one day, they would be able to grieve my death with the hope that I would be resurrected, with the knowledge that I would be resurrected. But to leave willingly and openly, that there would be no resurrection hope for me. They could cling on to hope, but they would know that that would probably be futile. And I really hope that the sirens are picking up on Mike. Feels symbolic. I'm still a servant, so I am still engaging in congregation activities, giving talks, carrying out congregation assignments, and boy oh boy, is that a miserable thing. If you thought that giving talks when you were pretty sure something isn't true feels bad, it feels a lot worse when you know it's not true, and you're just going up and giving a liar talk about lies to people who don't know any better. So pretty quickly I had to step down. I think I only made it a couple months being physically and mentally out before I stepped down as a servant. That was difficult. Because they made it difficult. They, when I told them I wanted to step down, they really wanted to try and work with me to get me to stay on. And I told them that it was because I had doubts. I was fully awake by this point, but I just told them that it was doubts because I knew the ramifications. If I told them I don't believe it's the truth anymore, then that, they can basically disfellowship you pretty quickly for that. And they asked about what? And I told them. Why did I do that? I don't really know. I just felt like, frankly, a part of me hoped that they would just disfellowship me, and that would also be easier. It would also be easier if I was just disfellowshipped, because then people get disfellowshipped, and it sucks, and it's terrible, but they'll come back, right? They'll come back. They've just drifted away from the truth, and but you see them at the memorial every year. I'm sure they'll be fine. But no, if I made a stand, then it would be irreversible, and I forget what I'm saying. My parents had a little intervention for me around this time after I stepped down, and my dad articulated why this was such a big deal in a way that I think illustrates how Jehovah's Witnesses view this and why it's such a big deal when somebody leaves. They had found out that I was harboring some political opinions. Big if true. The reason why they found this out, by the way, is because the very night that I woke up, the first thing I did was I registered to vote. I was so excited. I was like, wow, well, I don't have any issue against this anymore. That doesn't bother my conscience. So I signed up to vote that night, and there were some primaries, and I voted. And apparently somebody, a friend of mine, who was an elder, as a matter of fact, had some concerns about his old friend Jake, and that he might be harboring some political opinions, and so he looked me up on the voter registry to see if I had, in fact, registered to vote. And it turns out I had. So he sent me this text, kind of like, hey, how's it going? What's up? And then kind of veered very quickly into, well, there's no good way to ask this, but are you registered to vote? And I think I just denied it at first. Busted. He sent me a screenshot of my voter registration. Basically, told me that he was going to go to the elders if I didn't. And I told him that I had already talked to the elders about it, blah, blah, blah. Which is kind of true. You know, I'd already stepped down as a servant. What more do you want from me? My parents found out about this as well because gossip culture is huge within Jehovah's Witnesses. And even though they tell you not to gossip, it's more like, unless they do something wrong, and then you should tell everybody so everybody knows that they're not good association. And I was considered not good association, apparently. So my parents found out about this. And they said, you know, if you want to sit on the fence, if you just want to be inactive and sit on the fence, that's one thing. But if you're going to hop on the other side of the fence and join Satan and fight against me, that I can't stand for. So that's how they viewed it. You know, me voting and getting involved in an election or doing anything else, that was me literally hopping off the fence, joining Satan, and grabbing a demon pitchfork and saying, kill the beast, except the beast is the witness. I lost track of this metaphor. It was really upsetting having these conversations with my parents. You know, I love them deeply, and if they're watching this, I'm very sorry. I'm sure you're not happy with what I'm saying, but I love you. But you turn into different people when you talk about the organization. Shutters go over your eyes, your tone changes, and you start talking like somebody flipped a switch on the back of your head to witness mode. And it's all just aphorisms and apologia. It's just, you know, lines that you've been taught as a Jehovah's Witness with no reasoning or logic behind it. The witness logic sort of makes sense in its own internal terms, but by any other metric, it does not. By the way, I don't think it holds up on its own terms, and that's why I make the videos I do. But anyway, so hearing your parents, who you know are like deeply intelligent, compassionate people, making these arguments that just don't make any sense and don't even sound like them really, it's really heartbreaking because there is nothing you can do to change their mind. Witnesses have defense mechanisms in place. That's really what indoctrination is. It's giving people defense mechanisms against critical thinking and reality. So everything that you throw at them, they have some excuse, even if it's just the ultimate fallback of, we just don't know, but we trust in Jehovah, and he knows, we just have to wait on Jehovah. That's always the ultimate fallback. You can always just be like, well, you just wait on the big man upstairs. He's got it all figured out. Not sure why he likes us to believe in wrong stuff for long periods of time and cover up crimes. I don't know why he's into that sort of thing, but he is. So that all is happening. I am deeply depressed, deeply suicidal. I do start going to therapy, and that is very helpful. It's really the first time that I start to get an outside perspective on this, and I can't recommend it enough. I got some free visits through my health insurance, and because insurance sucks, it's expensive. So I wasn't able to carry it out super long term, but it was really helpful right out of the gate in learning some coping mechanisms. But I didn't stick with it for long enough, quite frankly. I should have kept going, and I didn't really learn the root of the problem, which is I need to not be doing this anymore. I need to leave, and I need to find a way to do that. What I'm overwhelmed by during this entire period is realizing how silenced I am and how silly that is. How afraid I am to express my opinions on all this stuff, and how afraid I am of the consequences of that. And once again, fear, how much fear is used for this supposedly loving organization. It all comes back to fear of displeasing somebody, even if it's just God. But I'm not worried about that anymore. When I was trying to encourage myself and make sense of why I felt this disconnect, I went to the website. I went to jw.org and I said, well, I'm just going to go back to basics. I'm going to just treat myself as somebody who has lost the love they had at first, who needs milk, is an expression we would use as a Jehovah's Witness, we can't handle solid spiritual food. We need just the basics. So I went on jw.org, just reading the basic frequently asked questions articles, because those are aimed at the public. Those are aimed at people who have no knowledge. And I thought, well, I just need to read that kind of stuff. And I started to realize how manipulative this stuff was, and how in some cases they just straight up lied. So I started writing down kind of like rebuttals, breaking down why that logic didn't work for me. And so after a while I had a lot of these things, and I decided, hey, you know what? There's not really any central place talking about these frequently asked questions articles. I should start a website. And so that's what I did. I started jwfaq.com, and I basically just uploaded a bunch of rebuttals to the frequently asked questions articles, and that was really fulfilling. It felt like I finally had a voice. Around this time, also, COVID is beginning, which means I have even more time for self-reflection because I am barely doing anything at my job all day. The one good thing about this is that meetings are now on Zoom, and I was getting to the point where meetings were just absolute torture. It was just so triggering, listening to things that I knew weren't true, and you realize how much of the meetings is just self-congratulatory and reassuring yourself that you're right, and just saying constantly, like, isn't it great that we're already right about all this stuff? Isn't that nice that we don't have to think about how we might be wrong because we're not? It's just hard to listen to. And when it got to the point where I wasn't able to deal with that anymore, meetings went to Zoom. I had a lot more free time, so I started a website, and that was really fulfilling. But it also made me want a little bit more. And what I really wanted to do was something that I had already wanted to do when I was a witness, was to start a YouTube channel. I just thought I'd be talking about video games or movies or something along those lines, especially now that I'm consuming a lot of YouTube, and that's what helped wake me up. I'm like, aha, suddenly I'm an expert in something. I know what I can talk about nonstop forever. So I started to have a real desire to do a YouTube channel, a desire that I suggest everybody suppress and ignore. The siren call of monetized opinions on the internet. I knew I couldn't show my face. I wasn't ready for those consequences. I knew that Armageddon was coming, but I was not ready to face it. So I started to make videos as a physically and mentally out witness, just not showing my face. And this, I think, is probably the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. Don't get me wrong. I love doing the channel. I love what I'm doing now, and I really liked doing it then too. I mean, it was really fulfilling. It felt like a great outlet, and at the time, it felt like the only option I had to have a voice, to be able to express myself, and keep my marriage and my family intact. This is not something you want to be talking about all the time to your believing partner if you're trying to create a peaceful home environment, because they don't want to hear about it. I'm going to get all worked up and sad, and it's just no good. So I thought, well, this will be a good outlet. And it might have been, but I was not honest about it. I didn't tell my wife about it, and that is a horrendous, horrible mistake, and still maybe the biggest regret of my life. I mean, I wish I wouldn't have gotten baptized, but I didn't really have a choice about that. Not really, in hindsight. This, though, I did. It felt like that's something I had to do, but it wasn't. What I really had to do was get myself to a place where I was ready to walk away from it. Instead, I tried to have it both ways while not being totally honest. And, like, me and my partner just have the most wonderful relationship. We're always honest about everything. And we're so supportive of each other. And she's always been so supportive of my creative endeavors of, like, writing and art and all this stuff. And I didn't feel like I could tell her about this. And so I didn't. And that was a horrible mistake. Because obviously, when she found out about it, it didn't go so great. I think in my head, I thought, well, maybe she'll wake up and then she'll watch it and then, she'll have, I don't know. I don't know what I thought, but it was dumb. And I really sincerely wish that I hadn't done that. I'm really glad that I started a channel. I just wish I had done it more honestly. And I wish I would have waited until I understood how to sink the freaking audio in my videos better. Don't watch my early videos, they're terrible. So that was a horrible mistake. You know, on one hand, I have this outlet that I feel empowered by and good about. But on the other hand, I'm not being forthright. I don't have open, honest communication. And so that weighs on my conscience, and that feels crappy. So that was not a great feeling. And I also begin to realize that I can't keep doing this. It's overwhelming. It's painful. Yes, I'm able to see my family, but what's there to talk about anymore? Every conversation completely centers around the organization. They're incapable of just talking. They're incapable of just having a conversation about anything without always bringing it back to the organization. And that's not a criticism of them. That's what you're supposed to do as a witness. All glory goes to Jehovah. You don't realize when you're a witness that Jehovah equals the organization, that you're constantly giving glory to the leadership because they've pulled the greatest trick the devil ever pulled. They convinced you that Kevin Spacey wasn't a creep. Line in Usual Suspects, like the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. That's kind of what the governing body does. They convince everybody that they're just these humble, nice, silly old men just trying their best, and God's the real one in charge. But they've just, copy, find, and replace Jehovah with the governing body. And suddenly all the publications make sense. And every conversation you realize is just about the religion that you know isn't true. So you realize like every conversation with your family is now centered around lies. They're preaching lies they don't know are lies. And you literally are lying. Like, I'm pretending to agree or lying by omission or whatever, I got really good at playing the part. But it feels bad. It does not feel good. And it's not the way healthy relationships are supposed to work. So I'm realizing I gotta change this. This is not sustainable. I need to blow everything up. I read Leaving the Witness by Amber Scora, one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's wonderful. It's a masterpiece. I'd recommend everybody read it, including active witnesses. It's because, frankly, it's a fascinating look into how working in banned territory works. So that's kind of just interesting on its own. But it's beautifully written, and she says something along the lines of, as a Jehovah's Witness, Armageddon was the only kind of definitive end that I knew. So I had to bring about my own Armageddon in order to leave. And I think that was kind of where my brain was at, although I didn't make that connection initially. I think that's kind of how I felt. I felt like I am a flighty, indecisive person in general. I'm really bad at finishing projects I start, just like creative projects. I'm a procrastinator. I'm bad at following through on plans. If you're my friend in real life, you know this. I'm just not good at that. So I need to set a deadline for myself and do something definitive. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. I'm always going to procrastinate. I'm always going to find a reason not to do it. That made sense at the time, the idea of posting my face. And so I did. And it did get found eventually the next day. I have gotten conflicting reports on how this video was found. Here's how I think it was actually found. I was told by my elders that somebody in a neighboring congregation had forwarded it to the elders. I was told later that it was a Bible study of an uncle of mine who found the video. And that really didn't make sense because this Bible study would have no reason to know who I am. I'm not even particularly close with this uncle. They don't even live close, so I don't know. I happen to think that the nearby congregation was the branch office of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. I've kind of gathered from talking to people who have done similar things that it seems like Watchtower does look at YouTube, particularly for people who are posting waking up or coming out videos. So is that what happened? I don't know. It does make the most sense logistically, but the video got found. And in this video, I talk a lot about the thing that has been the driving motivation for me, which is fear. And the fear of not having a voice, particularly in this case, in matters of my own health. My Crohn's disease had gotten so bad since I had woken up. I talked about my health issues. I talked about the fact that I have been losing copious amounts of blood through my stool, and I am genuinely afraid that I will get this fellowshipped anyway because somebody will find out about my medical decisions. and that almost happened in the previous year, and the only thing that stopped it was because there was a pandemic and the hospital liaison committee wasn't able to visit me. But the main thing I had become overwhelmed by was a sense that my parents would be willing to shun me, their only begotten son, like Jesus Christ himself, over a YouTube video where they disagree with my opinions, even though it's something that's very dear to them. People disagree with their parents on religion all the time. Kind of a cliche, actually, for kids to go off to college, lose their religion, awkward conversations around the dinner table on Thanksgiving. Even though when you wake up, you know what the consequences are, and I did know, and I was overwhelmed by them, and that's why I've been so depressed in the first place. I thought maybe my parents will be different. Maybe their love for me is more than this religion. Maybe they love their son. Maybe they love their son more than they love their religion. And it turns out they didn't. I know that they don't view it that way, and I think that question would kind of break their brains. They're not different. Jehovah's Witnesses are not a religion. My parents don't view it as having a religion and loving their religion more than me. They would say that they love Jehovah more than me, and I actually find that to be quite distressing, that you could love an invisible entity more than your physical child that you've held in your hands and nursed and changed his diapers and watched his YouTube videos and liked and subscribed. But I also know that they don't see a difference between God and the governing body and the religion. They think that this is the only discipline possible. So maybe it was an unfair thing to put on them, but I needed to know this for myself. I needed to know whether or not they really would shun me over a YouTube video. Because the other thing I had really become overwhelmed by was like, I am a millennial who's afraid to post his opinions about something on social media. What an anomaly. All of my friends who are non-witnesses, coworkers or people I know from high school, they post videos on their Instagram stories or whatever about them talking about some political opinion. I know that my cousins have some YouTube channel where they play with their toys, and yet I am a grown adult who really wants to say something, but I'm afraid to do so because I'm afraid of what my mommy and my daddy will think. And the consequences are real, but they're also so silly. Like, when you really break down what's happening, it's so silly and it's embarrassing that it could be that big of a deal. And I think I needed to know for myself. That video still doesn't have a ton of views, probably because it's garbage, but a lot of the views are from active Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's because that video spread like wildfire. I was talking to my wife on her way home from work. We're having a conversation, and I had given her a heads up that something had happened, and I had told her that I posted my face on YouTube and blah, 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 and we were like, okay, well, let's just not even worry about it tonight. Let's just have a chill night in and just watch a movie or something and deal with all that tomorrow. And in the 5 minutes between when she hung up the phone with me and pulled in the parking lot of our apartment complex, she had gotten 8 texts from people, including her mom and my mom, of people sending her the video. She watches probably 5 seconds of it, and the reality of it is just overwhelming, and it's absolutely horrible. And I said this earlier, but I just want to reiterate what a horrible mistake it was to not communicate not only my intentions fully, but what the ramifications would be, because I knew that this would blow my life up, and I knew that it would be a test of our marriage, but it wasn't fair of me to spring that, it wasn't fair of me to make it a pop quiz. I shouldn't have done that, and for some reason, my wife has forgiven me for this, but I have not forgiven myself. It's really messed up that I did that, and I really wish I wouldn't have. I know I've said this a few times by now, but I just want to reiterate that. So, this is an overwhelming few hours, and another thing that's happened, my parents call me. They had also received the video, and they asked me, what is AltWorldly? And I say, it's my YouTube channel. My mom is crying in the background. My dad is furious. and he's just yelling, and he's very upset, screaming, saying really horrible things. I talk about it in the video that I posted at the time, and I haven't gone back and watched it, and I don't plan to, so watch it if you want to know how upsetting it was, because really, it's one of the most traumatic experiences I've ever gone through. And I still have nightmares about it, actually. I have regular nightmares about that phone call and reliving it. What I remember very clearly my dad saying is like, our family has built a legacy, and you have just taken a giant crap all over your grandmother and your great-grandmother and your grandfather and your mom and me. Saying, because even in his fiery rage, he couldn't bring himself to curse, bless his heart, that I've taken a big shit on the family legacy. And it is telling that that was his first reaction, that it wasn't concern for me. There was no attempt at understanding. So they accused me of being in a cult, which was interesting. They accused me of being like one of those QAnon types, because I had said that a religion maybe wasn't true on the internet. The ultimate conspiracy. I was unhappy with this response. I didn't like it very much. And yeah, it was a horrible conversation. What I remember very clearly is my dad commanding me that I take the videos down. Like I'm still a teenager, and he's telling me to pick up my towel off the bathroom floor or something. And I just told him, no, I'm not going to do that. And I said it very calmly, like that, I think. I didn't say everything calmly, but I remember being pretty calm about that. And that was, I think, the thing that really upset him was realizing how he had no control over this. The religion is all about control, of course. It's about controlling your life. But if you are a family head, which of course I was, it gives you control over your family. And there is an expectation that everybody else in the family, the wife, the children, will yield to the family head. He said that it was very disrespectful, that it showed a lack of respect, and I did not view it that way. In hindsight, I think he was right, actually. I do think it showed a lack of respect. And I do think that it was in some way like disrespectful. But I think it's pretty disrespectful to give an ultimatum to your child that if you publicly disagree with their religion or vote in an election, that you'll shun them. I think that's a little disrespectful to their personhood and freedom as a human being and as your child. And the reality is I'm still coming to grips with how much respect I've lost for my parents. I love them very much, and if they're watching this, I can't imagine they've made it this far, but I love you guys so much that it hurts. To quote a Coldplay song, cool, that's in the video now, but it's true. I love you so much that it hurts, and but I've lost an immense amount of respect for my father and my grandfather for unquestioningly perpetuating this harmful thing and being elders in this harmful religion, and knowing how shunning affects people, being a part of judicial committees. I don't know if they've ever dealt with child sex abuse. I don't think so. Raising a family where religion was more important than love itself, where faith and love were inextricable and you couldn't have one without the other. I've lost a lot of respect for them for that. My dad is a man's man. He's a firefighter. He's a carpenter, and I still respect so much a lot of the values that he taught me over the years. But for all of what he taught me about what it is to be a man and what it is to be a husband, no man shuns his children. That's no father would be willing to shut out their children from their lives. No good husband would make his wife shun her son. So that's something that we'll deal with in therapy. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to dwell on that point that much, but I did. So there you go. So it's a pretty dark place. Marriage almost falls apart, blah, blah, blah. But you know, I posted this to see whether or not my family loved their religion more than me. And one person did, and that is my wife. I did this without telling her and without explaining what the ramifications would be. And she didn't have to forgive me for that. And I've learned that she's received a lot of pressure to leave me, and she hasn't. And I love her so much. I hope that she's watching this. I hope that one day she feels comfortable watching this. I love you. And the fact that you stay with me just continues to blow my mind. But it's made our marriage so much more powerful and so much more real. You realize how superficial love is when it is attached to agreement and when it's attached to faith and religion. You know, that's not to discount faith and religion altogether. But when that is the center of everything, there's a shallowness to love. And I know that many would disagree, but you find out how true it is when you remove that. And you have to go deeper. You don't get to just stay on that surface level. You have to find out what you really love about each other. And you don't get to say, because they love Jehovah, because they pioneer, or they set a good spiritual example, whatever. When you take away those things, you find out what you really love about your partner as a person. And it goes both ways. She has to find things about me that she loves in spite of our religious disagreements. And so do I. And our marriage is wonderful now. And we're definitely open about everything now, I can tell you that. I knew that if things did manage to survive, and they did, that I wouldn't ever keep something like that from her again, and I haven't. So, babe, I hope you're watching, and I love you so much, and thank you for staying with me. And please do like and subscribe to the channel. Don't worry, she'll think that's funny. Okay, the judicial process gets rolling pretty quickly, and the elders meet with me a few times. They meet with me to gather information. They asked what kind of stuff was in my videos, and they asked if I had spread them around. But they went beyond that. Like, they knew that I had guested on Germ's channel, Mentally Diseased. Hi, by the way. Love you too, buddy. And then they had a meeting just to admonish me, and then there was a judicial committee. I recorded those. You can listen to them. But they were also quite traumatic because I knew all these men, and I had respect for them. And one in particular I really saw as a role model in my life. And after hearing some of the things he said in the judicial committee, I was disgusted and horrified and found out what kind of person he really is, and how proud he is of this too. By the way, if any of you guys are watching this, I love all you guys too. I think that you should stop it. I think you should not be elders, because I think it's bad, to be honest with you. Hi. I don't know. And eventually, so I get disfellowshipped, and that's it, right? No. So my plan was to basically go around and say my official goodbyes to everybody. I had pulled a Goodbye Michael prior to this. The week leading up to when I posted the video, I knew that I was going to post it, so I spent one last time with everybody who's really important to me, including my sister and her husband and my nephew, and I was able to spend time with them, tell them I love them and stuff like that, because I knew that would be the last time that they saw me as a human being and not some agent of Satan. And that was true. So I had a week before I was going to get disfellowshipped, or 2 weeks, because the memorial was in there somewhere. And so I was like, okay, well, this week will be the week where I go around to my grandparents and aunts and uncles and just cry a lot, and that'll just suck. And what happened instead was I almost died, and I spent that entire week in the hospital. It turns out my fears about my health were not unfounded. I start losing even more blood, to the point where I am only producing blood when I go to the bathroom. My wife found me passed out in the bathroom. She had actually just gotten home. I passed out. I wake up in a haze. I'm projectile vomiting everywhere. I really don't remember it. But there's just blood and vomit everywhere. And the squad's coming in because she had to call 911 because I was passed out and white, and my eyes had rolled in the back of my head, and she couldn't find a pulse. So I was taken by ambulance to the hospital, and guess what I needed to survive? A blood transfusion. So I get blood. And, you know, me and my wife had talked about this a long time ago, that I was willing to do that, and she was okay with that, so that was no problem. But my parents find out about this, and of course they're trying to send her encouraging information like, you know, he might accept a blood transfusion, but don't let that, you know, stumble you or change your mind about blood transfusions. That's their concern. I actually had to have several blood transfusions because I was just bleeding profusely, constantly, and narrowly avoided having surgery. But during that time, I'm in the intensive care unit for a couple days, and nobody in my family even so much as texts me. I don't get a call from my father. I don't get a text from my dad. My mom does stop by and visits, and we have a nice final conversation. But she reiterates at the end of this conversation that they will be shunning me when it is announced this coming Tuesday that I'm disfellowshipped. So my mom visited me in the hospital to reiterate that I will be shunned. So that was nice. But when I'm in the hospital, I posted like a selfie of me getting blood, because even though I was dying, the content creator inside me was alive and well. Unbeknownst to me, a very, very kind person who goes by Apostate Syria started a GoFundMe to help with my medical bills. It worked. Like, getting tons of donations. I was legitimately able to pay off that hospital stay with the GoFundMe donations. It was wonderful. It saved our asses because me and my wife ended up having to move out of our apartment, and we really wouldn't have been able to do it without that. So, on one hand, the God of love, his people, are shunning a dying man in the hospital, and on the other hand, the satanic apostates are helping a stranger in need. So that was pretty cool, and I felt pretty validated in my decision. Since then, it has been quite eventful. It's been over a year, and they announced my disfellowshipping. I didn't even listen to it. I was playing Animal Crossing, and I was like, I should call in and listen, right? And then I was like, why? I don't care. So I didn't listen to it, but it was a massive weight off my shoulders, and I finally felt free. You know, since then, my health got bad again. It was okay for a while, got bad again. I ended up having surgery just a couple months ago, had my entire colon removed. So that was a really rough process, and it was also interesting because this was considered a family emergency, and my parents stopped shunning me for that time. And I tell you what, it was real nice. And to their credit, they didn't treat me in any kind of abnormal way. They never brought up Jehovah. They never brought up the organization. Not really, other than to talk about maybe, you know, what's going on with them, or, you know, something Sister So-and-so said. But they never pushed that stuff on me, which I genuinely appreciated. I know that was difficult for them, and it gave a good witness, i.e. it didn't make me want to jump out of the hospital window. So it was nice. They were super helpful. They stepped up their game, and really made sure that my wife was really well taken care of, because otherwise she would have been on her own taking care of me. And I think the congregation saw it as a chance to make sure that she didn't get roped in by my wicked ways of thinking this religion's not so great. But what's it been like? What's it been like since then? Well, I feel amazing. Like, since the surgery, physically, I feel unbelievable. I haven't felt this good in years, maybe my entire life. Like, legitimately, I didn't know how shitty I felt until I suddenly felt good. And so I've been really, really feeling good. But the other thing that happened is, like, I had a near-death experience a couple years ago when my wife found me and had to call the squad and all that. Between that and getting a new lease on life, breaking free from a cult, I've just felt so ridiculously motivated to make the most out of my time on this earth, because there are no guarantees. It would be nice if there was something else, but I don't know. So I better try and make this world more like a paradise while I can, right? And pursue everything I wanted to do. So I've obviously been doing the channel, which was a dream of mine. I didn't dream big. I wanted to do YouTube for fun. So I've been able to do that. But my dream was always to be an author, to write a novel, specifically, something for kids. And so I've been working on that. When I'm not working on videos, I'm working on that. And I've also been able to focus just on being a better husband, a more focused husband. And I've been able to do that. I'm able to do little projects around the house and do chores and, be there for my wife in ways that I wasn't able to before. You don't realize how much free time you're losing until you have it back. And so I'm pretty busy. I work a full-time job. I do this. YouTube takes a long time to edit stuff and insert memes when appropriate and when inappropriate, frankly. But even though that takes a lot of time, I still have time left over to do other personal creative projects, and I'm trying to get involved in some actual activism, some actual political activism. Been able to do that. Been able to just basically do everything that I've been wanting to do, and it's been fantastic. I've never felt as good in my effing life. And my marriage is wonderful. I can't describe to you. We've had, I really can't describe how unbelievably nice things have been. If you're questioning or you're wondering whether or not it's the truth, or you're just trying to get some perspective, get perspective. There's no downside to doing that. Either you will find out that everything that people like me are saying is crazy and wrong, or you'll find out a more nuanced perspective on your faith, and you'll find out that it really is true. So just do that. And Bo, god damn you. Keeps opening and closing the door. It's kind of fucked up that he knows how to do that. And my goal with the channel has just been to kind of model the tone and the level of research after the kind of channels that inspired me, like Lindsay Ellis and H-Bomber Guy, and ContraPoints and Innuendo Studios and Laura Crone, and some more news. They're always really good. They always do fun visual bits. Sometimes Cody will start out not having facial hair and he'll end with a full beard. Just really creative stuff that maybe some asshole would rip it off for a video. But it's an interesting time to leave a doomsday cult, because we live in a real doomsday situation. Climate change is ravaging the earth. We're already past the point of no return on certain markers. There's some damage that's irreversible, and hopefully we can get the ball rolling on stuff. Class inequality, systemic racism, just all these horrible things happening. It feels like we're at a point where some kind of Armageddon-like event could happen, and yet I'm quite confident that that won't happen, and that Jehovah's Witnesses don't have the truth. It would be comforting to have all the answers, but I don't. At the same time, I've never felt more optimistic. I actually was a far more cynical person as a Jehovah's Witness, because everything you see, that everything bad happens, you're just well, there you go. It's Satan's system of things, and it's only going to get worse. But thank God we have the kingdom coming. And everything good that happens, you're well, things are going to get good for a little bit, but it's not real happiness. It's not true change, because it's all going to get worse, and then the Great Tribulation is going to come, and then Armageddon. Everything good is not really that good, and everything bad is way worse than you think it is. And the truth is, to quote one of the great lines in film history, men are still good. That's from Batman v Superman, I'm sorry. But men actually aren't that great, but people are good. And now I get to have a beard. And what I've realized now that I finally get to live my dream of having a beard is that they're actually kind of itchy and uncomfortable. And I think I might actually prefer the clean-shaven look, because it's a little bit more cozy and androgynous, which is interesting to me as somebody who's trying to discover his sexual orientation more. So I hope you found this helpful. And sincere thanks to my patrons who have been able to support me and whatever this ridiculous endeavor was. And the thing that's crazy about my patrons is that they supported my channel even when it was complete shit. They saw potential in it, and it's only because of them that the channel is now any good at all. So thank you. And if any family is watching this, I just wish you'd shoot me a text. I won't say your names, because I know that would probably make you uncomfortable. To my sister, I'm watching all my favorite shows during the pandemic. I'm watching Arrested Development and 30 Rock, and I'm just wanting to text you fun memes from our favorite shows. We used to just talk in quotes from those shows all the time, and I can't do that. And boy, I'd love just to text you a funny joke from like Arrested Development or something. To my uncles, there's all this new Radiohead adjacent stuff coming out. We got Tom York and Johnny Greenwood doing a side project, The Smile. We gotta talk about these things. They recorded Skirting on the Surface, and it's once again they overthought the studio version. That solo piano version is superior, if you ask me. And I wish I could just talk to you about it. You know, Mom, Dad, all we do is sit around and laugh whenever we get together. And I miss just sitting around playing the music game. How fun was that? I missed that. And what's hard is just I think about my friends who were a lot like me, who had political opinions even though they knew they weren't supposed to, and who, you know, weren't homophobic or transphobic even though they were supposed to be. And like, I just wish they knew that they didn't have to live like that, that they could embrace who they really are, and that they're right. And if you're watching this, you're right. We should care about this stuff. The organization's wrong. They've always been wrong. And I love you. And there's so many people who do that don't even know you yet. I just miss all my friends, and I miss my family. But you know what's amazing is I've made so many incredible friends. I've made so many incredible friends because the reality is this world is not cold and satanic and demonic. It just isn't. People are so willing to listen. I've talked about this to people who I thought would just brush me aside, and I've made some incredible friends. Some of them have been ex-JWs, but a lot of them have just been people who knew me as a witness and just knew there was something a little off about me, and now they know what that is, and now we can be open and honest, and they're just wonderful. Like, this world is full of people who are ready and willing to do good and to help others and to love others if you just give them a chance. And as witnesses, we don't. We shut them out. We try and preach at them. We try and change them. And that's just not the way. It's an opposite Mandalorian. And I just constantly had flu-like system of things in the brain. In 4th grade, I had Mrs. Conroy. I'll say her name because she's probably dead, and if she's not, forward this to her, and hopefully she'll keel over. Cutting the part where I say an old lady should die. Might be a blooper, though. You know, absolutely did not feel that way at the time, and I don't feel that way now, by the way. Mrs. Conroy, the old goot. The scarlet-covered beast is, scarlet-covered. What is this beast? Colin Jost. And so I couldn't imagine, going 3 days without doing a little bit of business, let alone 33 years on this planet we call Earth. And this also gave me a lot of sympathy and concern about our stance on the gay folks out there in these United States. And frankly, I'll say it, the world. I don't know why my energy is so weird. I haven't even had one drop of alcohol. Best way of life. The best life ever. And I'll say it now. I didn't want to say it because I wanted the intro to be snappy, but best life ever sucks. It doesn't make any sense. It should be best life possible. The best life available. But the best life ever means that the life is complete. And then compared with all the other lives, that was the best life ever. But you can't say that it is the best life ever, because there's a bunch of simultaneous lives happening. Listen, grammar and Jehovah's Witnesses do not always go together. The fact that we call him Jehovah God doesn't make any sense. We don't call him Richard King. Cameo appearance by my Fluffy boy. Fluffy boy, you can make me sneeze. And because I used Reddit already, and I was aware that there was,
How's it going?
Hey, it's going.
You look cute.
Oh, thanks. I feel like I look like such a dork now. Like, I looked at my,
you look very cute.
Thank you. I looked at my, segment later where I have a beard. I'm like, I look like a different person. It's crazy.
I mean, you do, but you don't look... like a nerd or anything. You look very cute. Either way, you look very cute.
Well, thank you.